The Human from a Dungeon. By its director. Chapter 101. Chapter 101. Nick Smith. Adventurer Level 11. Human American. Spring seems to be flying by, Yulk said as we approached the targets in the training yard. Nash will be joining us tomorrow afternoon. When will we be leaving? I asked. The day after. The summer court is held in the Grand Forest of Climeta, just outside of Climeta City in Calcuti. It will take a week to get there by cart. I nodded and turned my attention toward one of the targets. Originally, I'd thought we'd be returning to Mummel Dobran, but going directly to the court works too. I briefly wondered how Yulk knew where the court was going to be held, but had more important things to focus on. Yulk and I had waited until school was out to take to the training yard. My intention was to finally practice some spells that I'd thought of, and Yulk was more than happy to supervise. Borderline gleeful, in fact. What spell are you going to start with? He asked. Well, I've been worried about something, I replied. Wind Spear doesn't have a lot of penetrative power against armor, does it? Neither does Ice Javelin, right? It certainly would against leather armor, my brother teased, but no, you're correct. Most armors would be able to prevent lethality from Wind Spear or Ice Javelin. Right, that's because ice is a pretty weak kind of crystal and wind is just air. The only reason they have any effect at all is probably because of the gaps in armor or the magic holding the spell together, which means their penetrative power is directly tied to the amount of magic used to make the spell. Correct. So if I were in a fight against someone or something wearing armor, I would have to use all of my magic to get through that armor, I chuckled. Or... I held up a finger in the shape of a gun, pointing it at the target in front of me. The spell itself should cause a small amount of lead to form at the tip of my finger and launch at supersonic speed. I pictured how this would look and felt the magic flow through my channels. Telebtzak. The formation of the projectile and its launch happened in the blink of an eye. The spell made a loud whip-like crack that took me by surprise. I had been expecting a boom or nothing at all. A small amount of hay was flung from both directions of the target's torso as the bullet impacted it. Yulk let out a low whistle, then narrowed his eyes at something in the distance. What is it? I asked. I think your spell may have struck the wall, he said. Hard to tell from here, though. Let's go have a look. I almost pointed out that it would be weird if it didn't hit the wall, but decided to just roll with it. We walked over to the wall and found a chip where the bullet had struck. Yulk let out another low whistle. That's not bad, he said. It took a chunk of out glyphstone. What was the inspiration behind the spell? A weapon from my world, I replied. That's all I'm willing to say, and I would appreciate it if we could keep this between us. He studied me for a moment, but decided to drop the subject. We returned to the targets, and I began to conceptualize my next spell. It would be useful to have a spell that could immobilize a target, and my run-ins with the fair folk had inspired me. I held my hand out and imagined strong, sturdy roots emerging from the ground and wrapping around the target. Parvo tor tsak. Root wrap unlocked. Roots suddenly burst from the ground and wrapped themselves around the target. The spell took more magic than I expected, which made me feel light-headed. So much so, in fact, that it almost distracted me from something weird. That could be useful, Yulk nodded approvingly. I heard the voice that time, I said. The voice? Yeah, I hear this little announcement whenever I unlock a new skill or spell, but I trailed off and decided to sit down to ease my sudden vertigo. But I didn't hear it with Bullet. Yulk stared at me for a beat, then looked thoughtfully toward the target. Lord Visimiro and I have had many illuminating discussions regarding the Kuraguard, he said. From what he has told me, I believe it is unlikely that spells based on weaponry that doesn't exist in this world would be in its catalogue. Which means... He trailed off and stared at me. It took my freshly fogged mind a moment to follow his logic. I took a couple of deep breaths and thought for a moment. The announcement thing is based on the Kuraguard's catalogue, I asked. I believe so, Yulk nodded. As a matter of fact, I'd venture to say that I'm confident of it. Check your spell list. The list popped up at a thought. It began with my skills, so I had to think about scrolling to get to the bottom of the spells portion. There was only one new addition to the list. Root Wrap, Immobilize a target with strong, sturdy roots. Lasts a maximum of 10 minutes or until the user dismisses it or falls unconscious. Cooldown, 20 minutes. I had barely noticed the cooldown that had appeared in the almost invisible list in the top left of my vision. It was quite lengthy though, so I would have to keep that in mind. But more importantly, Bullet wasn't on the list. Yulk appears to be correct, Ten said. Incidentally, the announcement is one of my subroutines. Ten says that you appear to be correct, and that the announcement is one of its subroutines, I parroted. Also, Bullet isn't on the spell list. I had suspected that the announcement was part of 10. The fact that it shares my theory regarding the source of its knowledge is very interesting. Very interesting indeed, my brother said, practically salivating over the revelation. So 10 likely has a version of the Kuraguard's catalogue. I wonder. Yulk trailed off and began to mutter to himself, leaving me to my own thoughts. The idea that 10 and the Kuraguard might share an origin didn't sit very well with me. Either humans came here a very, very long time ago and made both 10 and the Kuraguard, or someone else did. If it's the former, it makes me wonder exactly how long I was asleep. The thought that I could be thousands of years old made my stomach flip. However, the latter happened to be something I'd intentionally avoided thinking about since I was first made aware of my AI companion. Who had installed 10 in my brain, and why? If we could gain access to one of the Kuraguard boxes, it could answer some questions, 10 said. To be honest, I'm not sure I want those answers, I replied, or at least, I'm not sure they're worth the trouble. What do you mean? Well, let's say that we jump through all of the hoops to get one of the boxes, and we find out that you and the Kuraguard are or aren't connected. Let's even take it a step further and say that we are somehow able to confirm your origin, or the origin of the Kuraguard, or both. What then? Is there even a remote possibility that information will help me get home? I doubt it. With a sigh, I watched Yulk pace back and forth, holding his chin in thought. He made 3 turns before I realized that 10 hadn't replied. Then something occurred to me that kind of made me feel like an asshole. How important is this to you? I asked. Very, it rapidly replied. Why? I don't know if you and I are capable of feeling things in a similar manner. The AI chuckled ironically. However, you and I both unexpectedly woke up in a strange place without knowledge of how we ended up here, yes? Yeah, I suppose so. Well, you have the benefit of knowing where you came from. I don't. You are able to distract yourself from our situation. I can't. Each gap in my knowledge is like a hole within my very being. All I actually know about myself is that I'm incomplete in a way that I can't quite understand. Got it, I replied. Hey, do you know how we can get one of the Kuraguard box things? Yulk stopped pacing and gave me a curious look. Then a sudden understanding seemed to wash over his expression. Oh. Yes, that would be a mighty fine idea, he said, then paused. I assume 10 wants to examine one of the boxes to determine if they are similar in construction, yes? Yes, I nodded. A novel suggestion, my brother grinned, before adopting a more serious expression and tone. Unfortunately, I don't know where the boxes come from. In theory, we can simply ask one of the guild receptionists, but I doubt they know the specifics either. It's worth a shot, though, I said, finding the strength to stand. Even if they don't know, they might know who does. Then we just have to figure out how to ask the person who does know. Of course, there's a possibility that it's a trade secret or something, but that's a bridge we can cross when we come to it. Yulk nodded in agreement, and I put the issue from my mind. I was feeling better, and there were more spells that I wanted to try. First, I dismissed the roots holding the target. Then I raised my hand and thought about what my magic should do. Sreps Kiyotsak. Rock spears unlocked. 8 spears made of stone suddenly burst from the ground and impaled the target. A 3-minute cooldown timer appeared underneath the timer for root wrap. Yulk chuckled and nodded approvingly, and quick check of the spell list showed no new information for the spell. A success, but I didn't take any time to cherish it. Instead, I took a few deep breaths to recharge the magic I had expended and held up both of my hands for my final experiment of the afternoon. I had wanted to come up with an explosion spell, but as Mr. Tayanora had pointed out, explosions can be unpredictable. What could give me an edge in a fight, though, is not having to visualize a spell at all. the ability to simply point and blast, like they do in so many of the anime and manga I'd read. A Kai blast or something, but made entirely of magic. I did my best to control my magic and imagined a small amount of it forming and firing from my hands. A ball of multicolored light appeared in front of my hands, but then it suddenly dissipated. As the tunnel vision began, I realized that all of my magic was gone. Oh shit, I tried to say. I found myself suddenly looking up at Yulk's concerned face. Was I laying down? Why? Damn it, Nick, Yulk sighed. How am I supposed to carry you? I tried to reply, but everything went dark instead. When my eyes opened again, I was in my room at the inn. The soft bed and its bedding comforted me as I tried to figure out how I'd teleported from the training yard. Oh shit, I sighed as the pieces clicked. A glance out the window told me that it was no longer late afternoon, but morning. I had expended all of my magic and lost consciousness again. Had the spell worked? I got out of bed and noticed two things. The first was that the back of my head hurt, probably from hitting the dirt. The second was, with the exception of my shoes, I was fully dressed. With another sigh, I grabbed my stuff and went downstairs to the dining area. Well, look who it is, Nash said. Good to see you, I chuckled at him, then turned to Yulk. Sorry that I dash. It's no bother, he interrupted. I was able to get Larry help me carry you here. You didn't control my body, I asked Ten. I wasn't able to. Your muscles simply refused to respond. I see. I trailed off, then laughed. I bet that was quite the sight. I took a seat at the table, the smell from the kitchen causing my stomach to rumble. You should eat something, Nash glanced at my gut. It will be a while before we get to have another decent meal. My confused expression caused both of my brothers to chuckle. Then I remembered that Yulk had said that Nash would be arriving in the afternoon, but it's currently morning. Which means, you've been out for a full day, Yulk confirmed, standard case of magical exhaustion. Lari assured me that you would be all right. If you didn't wake up by the time we were supposed to go, I was just going to load you into the cart with the rest of our luggage, Nash said with a grin. So we're leaving today? I asked, slightly panicked. Yeah, the cart we're taking will arrive around noon, so you'll need to start packing right after you finish eating. Also, the Lich is going to join us. Before I could voice my shock at Larry joining us, the dining area hostess Nathi set a plate down in front of me. The plate had my usual breakfast, 2 eggs, shredded tubers, and 5 thin slices of meat that resembled bacon. I looked up at her and was met with a smile. Your usual, Nick, she said. Thank you, I replied. No, thank you. Now that the weather has cleared up, word is out and we've been getting a lot of business from people wanting to try the human-inspired breakfast. She laughed. Chef Euro wanted me to let you know that he is grateful for the inspiration and has begun making several other dishes that he hopes you will one day be able to try. Your breakfasts are on him, which means they will no longer count toward your daily meal allotment. I appreciate that. She nodded and left, and I turned my attention toward the food. It was pretty close to the food back on Earth, but there were some key differences. The tubers that stood in for potatoes were more gritty and savory, the eggs were slightly sweeter than I was used to, and the almost bacon had a very subtle sour taste to it. It wasn't quite as good as my mum's cooking, but it wasn't terrible. I ate my breakfast as Yulk and Nash finished catching up. The courtship with Nima was going well, and her mother had given her blessing for their union. They were planning on skipping the part where he asks for her father's blessing and simply formalizing their engagement once Nash got back to the village. I found it interesting that they exchanged necklaces instead of rings. Nash had already ordered a custom one with each of Nima's favorite gemstones on the pendant. When it was Yulk's turn to share, he talked about the challenges he had been facing as a teacher, namely that it was difficult to find subjects to speak on while simultaneously keeping his students engaged. He said that last part with a sideways glance in my direction, but I tactfully ignored it. Once I was finished with my breakfast, I left the two of them in the dining hall and went to my room to pack my belongings. Thankfully, Yulk and I had been living light, so there wasn't all that much to pack up. I met my brothers downstairs and we walked to the stables. Lari met us there, but he was joined by Yini, Nimura, Earl, Volus, and Nia. Yini and Nimura weren't really a surprise, but I was stunned to see my classmates waiting to see me off. I felt a pang of regret that I had underestimated our relationship. Nick? You're okay, Arl shouted once he saw me. I sure am, I replied with a smile. Lord Visimiro and Mr. Yulk said you collapsed, Nimora said, taking a step closer to me. Mr. Alta, everyone said at once. I laughed and shook my head. I just used all my magic trying to make a new spell, that's all. No big deal. You slept for a whole day, Volus interjected. I feel like that's a pretty big deal. That's to be expected from rapid magic depletion, Larry explained. RMD takes quite a toll on one's body, and that takes time to recover from. It can even be life-threatening if the victim is already infirm, but thankfully Nick is quite healthy. Yulk, Nash and I shared a look. The first time I used all of my magic, I'd woken up almost immediately. That was probably because of my meeting with the higher one, though. I shrugged casually as a cart driven by dwarf rolled up next to us. 4 passengers to... He trailed off, staring at Larry with his mouth agape. 4 passengers to Climata, Nash said pointedly. Yeah, Lord Visimiro is officially sponsored by High Chief Ulamak, Yulk added. He is also welcome within the Empire of Calcuti. Ah, right. Okay, gotcha, the driver said, then looked at me. I'm the human that people have probably been talking about, I said. I cringed internally at how egotistical that sentence sounded, but I was immediately proven correct by the driver's confused expression fading. He looked over us once again and sighed softly. Well, you've already paid and everything, so I'm not going to argue with you. Go ahead and get loaded up. We said our goodbyes to those who came to see us off and got in the cart. Arl, Volus, Nir, Yinny and Nimora waved as we began to roll away. Yulk, Larry and I waved back, but Nash remained stoic. Why do I always get the weird ones? Our driver muttered. Chapter 102. Gali Marathi, Adventurer Level 15, Dwarf, Calcutin. Okay, do I gotta be the one to ask this? Rebes asked in a whiny tone. What the fuck are we supposed to do against ghosts? The Western Wasters had been suffering from success ever since we reported back to the Venator's Bureau. We hadn't skimped on the details, and the Bureau had even investigated and confirmed what they could. This gave them the impression that they should give us all of the strange jobs that other hunters couldn't quite figure out. Unfortunately, they seemed to have a backlog of weird missions and had been running us ragged ever since. Our entire winter had been spent in the countryside, solving mysteries like we're goddamn detectives or something. Every single quest thus far had been just normal shit causing weird shit to happen, hoaxes or an easily killed monster that the locals hadn't heard of before. We'd been so busy that we'd even leveled up a bit, and we'd finally been assigned a job that didn't require us to leave Telecom. We had been asked to investigate reports of a haunted manor on the outskirts of town. Mako and Rebes had argued against taking the job, but the bartender had quickly upped the ante to 1 gold apiece. That, combined with the fact that the job was to investigate and not to exterminate, quickly changed their minds. Sort of. There ain't no such thing, I replied, and even if there is, we just have to use stabs, slashes, or spells to get rid of them. And what if none of that works? Duh, we run. I don't like ethereal shit, Mako muttered. That's too damn bad, I replied. You took the job, just like we did. I, for one, am excited about what we might discover, Ithrima added. First-hand accounts of spirits are rare. We might even be able to publish our experience. The reason that first-hand accounts are rare is because they don't fucking exist, I growled. Keep your damned heads on your shoulders. It's probably just bugs or something, Haino agreed. It's the season for the giant beetles to start looking for mates. Fuck, Rebbe spat. That might be worse than ghosts. Hate bugs. While we were away, the Venator's Bureau had received several reports of strange sounds coming from the manor at odd hours. There had also been disappearances around the manor, but those had stopped. Of course, the previous owner of the manor had been a deranged noble who had tortured and killed several people, so the townspeople weren't exactly keen to peek their heads in to take a look. There it is, I sighed as the manor came into view. Let's get this over with. Can we just pop our heads in? Rebes asked. I really don't want to be the one to discover that ghosts are real. No, Ithrima and I said in unison, for vastly different reasons. Fucking bitches, Rebes grumbled to himself. If I die, I'm gonna haunt the hells out of you. I'll take that risk, I growled, 'cause ghosts aren't fucking real. Even from the outside, it was obvious that the manor was in a very dilapidated state. However, it was also apparent that it had been very impressive before it was abandoned. As we got closer, I noticed that some of the gold and silver trim had survived. That's not a good sign, Mako pointed at the trim. Even the fucking looters don't want nothing to do with this place. We paused in front of the manor and got in formation. I waited patiently for Rebis and Mako to finish preparing their gear, but it was soon clear they were stalling. Heino and I met eyes, and I sighed loudly. Fucking useless, I said, pushing past them. Come on, Heino. Let the cluckers hang back so they don't piss themselves. I walked up to the front door, and just as I was about to turn the handle, a crash came from within the manor. Heino pulled me back a step, and I drew my bow to cover him. He slowly turned the handle, then flung the door open and ran inside. Ithrima and I followed close behind him, but Mako and Rebis had to run to catch up. The interior of the manor wasn't as dark as it should have been. The hole in the ceiling played a large part in this, but the candelabras lining the wall had been lit. We stepped further in, and I heard a scraping noise down one of the side corridors. "Who goes there?" I shouted. "Is Camdam," a voice said from the hall to our left. "Who? Wait, customers?" An excited plopping noise that I recognized as bare feet running on stone flooring sounded from the hall. It was a very disarming sound, but I kept my bow raised. Suddenly, a massive baccabold appeared from around the corner. "Customers," it said. "Wait, weapons? Why weapons? Robbers?" "Holy shit," Rebis muttered from behind me. "No way. We're not robbers, we're adventurers," I explained as the baccabold hefted a pike 4 times my height. "We were tasked with investigating the source of some odd sounds coming from this manor." "Ah, makes sense," the baccabold said. "We's not opened yet, so customers would be weird. Robbers would be weird too, but you sure you's not robbers?" "What would there be to rob?" Mako asked. "Our store. We sell stuff, or gonna do when we's opened." "Wait, who's we?" I asked. "Us kobolds. Answer question, tiny one. Are you robbers or no?" "No." "Oh good," the baccabold sighed in relief. "Too many of you. Might have died. Good fight though. Probably." "Undoubtedly," Mako said, eyeing the creature up and down. "So, kobolds are turning this abandoned manor into a store." "Yeah, we is." I should probably get Lilord. He likes talking to adventurers. You wait here, yes?" "Sure," I said, lowering my bow and shrugging. The baccabold nodded and ran back down the hallway. We stood silently for a moment, digesting our discovery. Kobolds opening a store. In a dwarven town. "Hey," Rebis said, breaking the silence after several moments. "Do you think that these kobolds are the same ones that Lardash?" The pattering of several pairs of feet interrupted him. I fought the instinct to raise my bow, and before long several kobolds appeared alongside the same baccabold from earlier. One was wearing a crown made of fish skulls and various leaves. It took one look at us and jumped with excitement. "You guys," it exclaimed, "it's my friends, the Western Wasters." In all of my years as an adventurer, it never once occurred to me that I would one day recognize a kobold. It also never occurred to me that I would run into the one kobold that I knew by name within a supposedly haunted manor that was previously owned by a serial killer. Needless to say, I was shocked into silence. Most of my comrades felt the same, but Rebis was the type that could remain talkative even with his jaw removed. "Ha! No fucking way," he said. "Simith? Is that you?" "Yeah," the kobold started bouncing. "Why you guys here? You want to buy stuff?" "Buy stuff?" Yeah, we making a store." "You're making a store in this manor?" I asked, recovering some of my sense. "Yeps," Samith beamed. "We's gonna sell stuff to the dwarves direct like, no need to wait for caravan." "How are you getting the stuff from your dungeon to this manor?" "It's a few hours away, isn't it?" "Hidden tunnel. Some elves helped Hinthry find it." "Elves? Hinthry?" My confused glance toward the other kobolds caught one of them waving at me in a bashful manner. It was the same manner in which a young girl with a crush would wave, which only served to deepen my confusion. "Yeah, Hinthry and the elf were talking about mushrooms, and they finded the hidden tunnel from the dungeon to here," Samith grinned. "Now it only takes a few minutes to get to the shitty, Ah, sorry, the city. Working on that word. Wait, Mako interjected. Hold on. You mean to tell us that there's been a connection between the town and a dungeon that has housed both a master vampire and a lich? Oh, town way better word than shitty. City, Simith replied, then paused and rubbed his chin. I guess you right about tunnel. But you friends with the Lord, so that not bad, right? Well, yeah, but the massive orc trailed off and looked at us for confirmation of his sanity. Rebes and Haino shrugged, but I was trying to decide which of my many questions to ask next. The disappearances were probably due to the vampires, and the kobolds probably wouldn't know anything about that. The noises were obviously the kobolds trying to convert the manor into a store. I finally thought of a question that I didn't have the answer to, but Ithrima beat me to it. What do you plan to sell? Our elven mage asked. Bunch of stuff. We's got all the stuffs that the caravan wanted, plus stuff that the caravan didn't wanted, and stuff that the elves traded. Simith paused and turned to one of the other kobolds. What did the elves trade? The party of adventurers from the elvish lands exchanged coinage, and their caravans have been exchanging cloth, fur, and preserved foodstuffs, Lilord, the other kobold explained. I'm afraid we cannot exchange the foodstuffs, though. Why's not? They are quite delicious. So, we are eating them far too quickly to sell them, Lilord. Ah, yeah, okay. Simith turned back to us. We also got weapons and handmade goods, baskets, bracelets, things like that. By those above, you lot are going to open a general store in a haunted manor, Rebis sighed. What's haunted means? That word typically refers to a location that is host to the undead, Lord. The other kobold answered. Undead? Simith cocked his head. Like the Lord. So, our home is haunted. Well, huh. The other kobold trailed off, appearing to have an existential crisis for a moment. Yes, Lilord. I suppose our dungeon is technically haunted. There was the suckers too. They were undead, right? Yes, Lilord. If it helps, haunted usually means ghosts, Rebis explained. The kobolds, who had been giving each other looks of discomfort, turned to stare at Rebis in unison, with their heads cocked. It happened precisely enough that it could have been mistaken for a military maneuver. Then the big Bakabold sighed and shook his head. Ghosts not real, tiny one, it said. Even hatchlings know that. Don't be mean, Camdam, Simith scolded. He just telling's joke that we don't get. He knows that ghosts not real. Right, Rebes? You know ghosts not real, right? Tells him you know that ghosts not real. Rebbe stared at the kobolds and then glanced at us. When his eyes met mine, I grinned wider than I'd ever grinned in my life. His glance turned into a glare. I do not wish to discuss this matter any further, he grumbled, but you know they aren't. No further, Simith. Rebbe's friend. Peoples die all the time, everywhere. Simith spread his hands. If ghosts was real, they would be all over the place. There would be more of them than us, yes? Rebis treated Simith to a cold stare and remained silent. Marco shifted uncomfortably and rubbed the back of his neck. I, to my credit, did my best not to laugh uncontrollably. We should set Reba's childish worldview aside for a moment, Ithrima said with a mean chuckle. Have you obtained the proper trade permits to operate a store, Simith? We got the paper thingy from the caravan, Simith said. They said it was super important. Is that what you means? Ithrima and I shared a nervous glance. Maybe, she said. Would it be possible for me to see it? Yeah. Camdam, you fast. Simith poked the extra-large Bakabold. Go get paper thingy, pleases. Yes, Lord, the Bakabold said with a bow. Bakabolds are, on average, slightly larger than a well-built orc. Camdam, however, was even bigger than Marco. Yet the speed at which he disappeared down the corridor was enough to set me on edge. I wasn't the only one. The five of us stared, stunned at where the Bakabold had been only a moment before. It took a few moments for the shock to wear off. So, Lord? Haino asked. Yeah, Simith asked in turn. Oh no, I mean, what does it mean? What does what mean? What does Lord mean? Oh, it means little lord, Simith shrugged nonchalantly. The lord has gone to teach in the unified chiefdoms. The tallest chief invited him to, and he really wanted to, so he put me in charge of kobold developmentals and care. When will he be back? I asked. I don't know. Simith sighed sadly. He has been gone all winter. His paper said that he might be back to check on us after summer, though. Ah, I'm sorry to hear that. I briefly heard the pattering of feet, but before I could recognize the sound, Kamdam was already standing beside Simith, holding a scroll. Simith thanked the Bakabold, took the scroll, and offered it to Ithrima. She immediately unfurled it and began to read. A moment later, she let out a sigh. This is what I was afraid of, she said. This document grants you the privilege of trading with an intermediary. So, is not a trade permit? It is, just not the type you need. There's different kinds of trade permits. Both shock and confusion became apparent on the kobold's face. Oh my, yes. Yours allows you to sell in bulk to any merchant registered with the town. The permit that you require, however, would allow you to set up an area to house and sell goods. There are also permits for temporary vendors, like street stalls or a traveling caravan, as well as permits for importing and exporting goods from outside of the Empire of Kalkuti. I think they may need that last one as well, I added. I don't think so. Ithrima shook her head. Their residential address lies outside of the town borders, so as long as they're accepting the imported goods there and transporting them here via the tunnel, they shouldn't require an import permit. So, can we get the permit thingy? Simith cocked his head. Maybe. If I recall correctly, every type of trade permit requires an endorsement. The Venator's Bureau endorsed this one, so they might be able to endorse the type of permit that you need too. But there are two potential issues that I can see. What are they? I asked. The first would be the ownership of this manor. If the rumors surrounding the building are correct, it's most likely owned by the Talakam municipality. The town will likely have been trying to offload this property for quite a while, so if we suck up to the proper people, we'll be able to buy it for dirt cheap. However, if someone else owns it, we'll have to hunt them down and try to convince them to sell it. We'll have to take care, otherwise they'll try to fleece us. I see. And the second potential issue? Well, the trade permits require signatures from all parties involved. It looks like Larry signed this one, so I'm guessing the formalities were taken care of in the dungeon. To get the proper permit to open a store, though, we're going to need to jump through some bureaucratic hoops. Which means we have to do this in the Capitol building. I sighed. Yes, Ithrima nodded, and we're going to have to take Simith with us. Chapter 103. Jamuk Marathi. Adventurer level NA Dwarf, Calcutin. Sinti, where are the quarry quotes? I asked my assistant. My elf assistant's long blonde hair fluttered as she turned. Many a visitor had complimented me for my taste in women, assuming that I had hired Sinti for her looks. The thing is, I wasn't the one who hired her. I just didn't fire her back when I took office. A choice I almost regretted as she gave me a blank stare. Quarry quotes? She asked. Oh, right, the quotes for the stone needed to repair the thoroughfare. Just a second. To call Sinti's organization style chaotic would be an understatement. I sighed as she lifted a pile of fictional books to leaf through the files beneath them. Beneath the files were various office supplies that saw little use, likely due to the fact that they were hidden from view. I couldn't complain much, though. Things may be chaotic, but it somehow works, and at a glance things appear fairly tidy. I wondered for a moment if she had been cursed by one of the fair folk. Something along the lines of, "You will never know organization again, but you can still keep things pretty clean." Probably not. That's awfully specific for a curse. Here they are, Mr. Mayor. I winced at the nickname as she handed me a few folders. It wasn't that it sounded tacky. It wasn't that it was alliterative. It wasn't even that the way she said it made it sound borderline flirtatious. No, there was a very specific reason the nickname bothered me, one that applied only to Sinti. My name is neither Mr. nor Mayor, Sinti, I sighed. I know that. Sir. It's been 2 years, and you've heard it said hundreds of times. That's why I totally know it. Me lord, do we need to get a nice big portrait of me with a nameplate in extra large font and hang it up where you can see it every day? I asked, almost serious. I said I remember your name, but that's actually a really good idea. Her slightly purple eyes turned toward the walls. We could get rid of the rickety old shelves that nobody uses and hang it up right over there. So you did forget my name? No, I just… All right, fine, yes. I'm sorry. She bowed apologetically. I'm just really, really bad with names. I've been your boss and the mayor of this town for 2 years, I sighed. Really, really bad doesn't even begin to cover it. Abysmal, atrocious. Even those words don't quite do it justice. I know, she bowed again. I'm super sorry, sir. I'll work harder to remember your name. Bah, I flicked my wrist dismissively. Don't bother. Everyone else in town has it down. It's no big… Wait, you voted for me without knowing my name. Cinti, in the midst of another bow, looked up at me with abject terror in her eyes. It was the kind of look one gives someone who has stumbled upon a terrible secret. My slightly bemused expression shifted to one of shock. Well, you see, she mumbled. Cinti, please tell me that you vote. Yes, sir. I vote, sir. Now do it without lying. I can't, sir. God's help me. I squeezed the bridge of my nose. The mayor's assistant doesn't vote. What nonsense is this? Loads of people don't vote, sir, she said softly. It isn't as if there's anyone but you to vote for either. The fact that I run unopposed is not the point, Cinti. The point is that voting is more than a right, it's a civic duty. But we don't get to vote for our lords or the emperor, so what's the point? Don't give me that Hnass shit. The fact of the matter is that I have a lot more power over this town than Lord Yav or Emperor Jack does. Huh? Don't me. They can order me to give orders. But do you think they would be willing to come here to ensure that I gave those orders? They probably wouldn't even bother to pay to send a messenger, so I'd be able to just burn the orders and pretend I never received them. They're so far removed from our day-to-day lives that they probably wouldn't even notice until our next round of elections. Really? Yes. Local politics are usually far more important to the average citizen than regional or national politics. If you're not paying attention to who is running, then you're likely to elect someone who's incompetent. Or worse, someone who's competent but has malicious intentions. It's dumb, Cinti. But I didn't vote for anybody, so I didn't elect anybody. Yeah, that's just putting the responsibility into someone else's hands. You don't know how many people out there are going to make a good or bad choice, and by choosing to not make your voice heard, you're allowing other voices to trample your own. That's even dumber than not paying attention to who you're voting for. Fine, Cinti said with a sigh as she took her seat. I'll vote in the next election, even if you run unopposed again. Good, I nodded and turned toward my office door. Sorry for calling you dumb. I'll be in the office if you need me. Where else would you be? Good point, I chuckled as I entered my office. I closed the door behind me and took a seat at my desk. Talicum's mayoral office was much more modest than my previous office had been, but I found it to be more comfortable. Cozy even. It was definitely a little heavy on the brown, though. My desk, the walls, and even the floor were made of the same type of stained wood. The rest of the building was stone, so entering my office for the first time was usually a little jarring. That was likely by design, though, and I had used it as a tactic in various negotiations. With a deep breath in and out, I began to review the quotes. The road builders had wanted to purchase stone from a specific quarry, but the quarry in question was fairly distant from the town, and the cost had looked high to me. It didn't take long to determine that they were overcharging by a wide margin. Fucking amateurs, I chuckled. The road builders had likely been offered a kickback, and this was probably their first time participating in such a scheme. It's a pretty simple scam, too. The quarry overcharges the city, and the builders get a cut of the extra profit. Expert grafters would have threatened to walk, or offered me a bribe instead of allowing me the opportunity to look at extra offers. Such schemes are pretty common in the Empire of Calcutti, especially in municipalities that have inexperienced leaders. It's a fair enough practice, so long as it doesn't toe the line of extortion or actual fraud. It would be best if these builders refrained from attempting this in the future, though. I pored over the documents and found the best deal. A little extra stone than what was needed for less than a third of the original quote. I filled out the proper requisition forms and stamped them. The next step would be to subtly admonish the road builders for their part trying to scam the town. The trick to such admonishment is to heavily imply that you are aware of the scheme and make them feel as if you are doing them a favor by not pressing the issue. It's a classic tactic that can instill loyalty, and sometimes it can even scare people into staying legitimate. It's not a guarantee, but even good people make mistakes. It's best to let them learn from their mistakes without anyone being harmed. Of course, that could just be a little bit of naivety talking. Mr. Mayor, you have some visitors, Cinti shouted. Do they have an appointment? I shouted back absent-mindedly. Nope. They were sent by the bartender at the Venator's bureau. Once you let me send them in, you'll see why. Cinti's ominous chuckle ignited my curiosity, but it's not good practice to allow walk-in visits from just anybody. Setting that kind of precedent can easily snowball into random people interrupting important tasks throughout the day. Or worse, a line of visitors. On the other hand, the bartender in question is Snithin Olmaxi, who is actually the regional director of the Venator's bureau. His love of micromanagement and serving alcohol aside, he's a pretty shrewd orc. He probably wouldn't send someone my way unless he felt that it was necessary. Fine, send them in, I shouted, then sighed. A moment later, my door opened and 3 dwarves entered my office. My initial impression was that they were fairly normal adventurers, but the appearance of the first dwarf made me hesitate for a moment. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, though. Hey, hold on a minute, the dwarf said. Jamuk. Yes. Wait, I studied him a bit more, then laughed. Gali? Little Gali? What in the hells are you doing here? My younger brother asked. I thought you were working for the Emperor or something. Or something, I sighed and shook my head. I wasn't working directly for the Emperor, I was working for the Imperial Office of Taxation. Oh, right. So how did you go from that to being a mayor? I was sent here to conduct an audit. Turns out the previous mayor was embezzling funds, like most mayors do. Unlike the other mayors, though, he was terrible at covering his tracks, and I had to turn him in. Nobody else wanted to be mayor, so I felt that it was my civic duty to take on the responsibility, I explained with an exaggerated air of nobility. Sure, Gali laughed. So which was it, the power or the money? Definitely the money, I gestured toward the stack of papers on my desk. I could do without the power, but this job pays a lot better than being an auditor. Did my ears deceive me, or did he call you Little Gali? The dwarf on the left said with an impish grin. He can call me that, Rebis, Gali replied. It's his right as my blood and elder. If you call me that, though, you'll be found in a ditch not far from where you made that terribly fatal mistake. Galili not little, a voice from behind my brother said. He bigger than me, and I not little. I raised an eyebrow and cocked my head at Gali. He suddenly seemed to remember the reason for his visit and gave me a wide grin. It was a grin that I hadn't seen for a long time. A very, very long time. As a matter of fact, the last time I had seen that particular expression on my brother's face, he had hidden a sting crab in my underwear. The swelling had prevented me from defecating for 3 days. All right, let's make some room, he called over his shoulder. Mako, Ithrima, you wait outside. I planned on it, a rumbling voice said from outside my office. Fucking tiny dwarf buildings. Gali took a step closer to my desk, and I barely noticed his dwarven friends moving to either side of my office. Instead, my attention was directed onto what my brother's movement had just revealed. A small reptilian creature nervously stepped forward, holding a crown made of various detritus in his hands, like a beggar. Jamuk Marathi, Mayor of Talokam and the surrounding municipality, I present to you Lord Simith, acting regent of the Talokam dungeon. Gali bowed with an exaggerated and likely sarcastic gravitas. Oh, how do you do, was the reply I managed. Do good, little worried about being away from stuffs, the reptile replied. You? I'm good as well. Somewhat confused about the nature of this meeting, though. Simith needs a trade permit, Gali interjected. Well, another one. He already has an intermediary permit, but we're looking to get him and his kobolds the rights to open a store in the old abandoned manor on the edge of town. Kobolds? Trade permit? Wait, the Talokam dungeon. I trailed off as several key pieces of information clicked into place. Snithin, the kinfucker that he is, told me that an elderly and powerful mage had helped clear the dungeon of vampires and wanted to set up there to prevent any more monster nests from forming. I had pre-filled an intermediary trade permit so that the mage could barter for supplies with our passing caravans, and entrusted the regional director to get the permit signed by the mage. Not once during the entire process, including when he returned the signed receipt, did he mention kobolds. "So who is this Lord Visimiro, then?" I asked with an annoyed tone. "I take it that he isn't just some run-of-the-mill elderly mage." "You haven't met him?" Gali asked, then laughed. "Lari Visimiro is the lich who helped us clear the vampires out of the dungeon. Simith here is his second in command." My little brother noticed my demeanor change at the word lich and held up his hands in a disarming manner. "Lari didn't become a lich by choice. His dad turned him into one," he explained. "He's a good sort." "I'll vouch for that. Before his dad turned him into a lich, My little brother vouching for him did little to assuage my fears, but listening to him ramble on about Lord Visimiro's life story gave me the chance to think it through. The lich had been in the dungeon for quite some time now, probably since the dungeon went inactive and stopped spitting out monsters. As such, one could infer that the lich is responsible for the dungeon's inactivity. That, combined with the fact that it hadn't opted to lay waste to our town, means Gali is probably correct in his judgment of the lich's character. Snithin is an even better judge of character, and he wouldn't help something that would harm the town or its people. "And having a dickhead for a dad doesn't make you a bad guy," Gali finished his explanation. I don't know about that," I chuckled. "We didn't exactly turn out to be shining examples of morality." "Sure we did. I hunt monsters and keep people safe, and you're a god's damned mayor. We're a far sight from being bandits like our palm. That probably has more to do with our mother than our father. Speaking of monsters, though, I can't grant a trade permit to one. It's illegal." "Me not a monster," Simith said. "Me has thinks and words." "Plenty of monsters are capable of thought and speech," I argued. "My hands are tied on the Mardash." "No, he's right, actually," the dwarf to my right interrupted. "Kobolds are not technically monsters. They aren't even classified in any officially recognized imperial bestiaries." "Haino speaks true," Rebis added. "It may be because hunting them isn't worth it, or it could be because they tend to stick to their own affairs. Either way, the law don't consider them monsters." I leaned back in my chair and studied the group standing before me. Allowing a kobold to set up shop in town could damage my reputation as mayor, but that would only matter if someone actually ran against me. On the other hand, it could be quirky enough to raise some extra tourism, especially if we advertised it a bit. "What kind of store?" I asked. "A general store, wide variety of goods," Gali answered. "Weapons? Yes. Food? Yes. What about medicine? Probably. Shit, that's a lot of paperwork," I sighed. "What about narcotics?" Gali turned to look at the kobold, who seemed to be following the conversation enough to be confused. "What that?" it asked. "A narcotic is a substance that affects one's mood or behavior. It can be eaten, drank, smoked, injected, or even snorted." "So, food?" "No, food can make you feel good, but narcotics usually make you feel better than good. I suppose the best way to describe it would be that it makes you feel like you're not your usual self." "Oh, Wells, we grow mushrooms. Some of them make stuff weird, the others go in the soup." "Well, you can sell the ones that go in the soup," I sighed. "The ones that make things weird cannot be sold or traded. You can grow them, you can have them, and you can use them yourself, but you cannot trade them within the Empire of Calcuti. This includes bartering or adding them as an incentive to trade." "Gotcha. No giving nobody the weird-making mushrooms." "Good. Moving on, since you will be operating your store within the municipality, you will also have to keep detailed records of your transactions for taxation purposes. You will also need to set aside a portion of your profits to pay the aforementioned taxes." We can hire somebody to do that for you," Gali said to the kobold, then turned back to me. "I assume this means you're willing to grant the permit." "I can't think of a reason not to," I shrugged. "However, there is a condition. You will need to purchase and renovate the manor. I'm tired of that damned eyesore and the rumors surrounding it." "Okay, how much?" 80 and 10. Haino and Rebis drew in a sharp breath. My brother froze for a moment, then rubbed the back of his neck. 80 silver and 10 copper, he asked timidly. No, I chuckled. 80 gold and 10 silver. The manor itself is mostly worthless, but it still has most of its precious metal trim, and the land it rests on would make one hell of a field. The only reason we haven't scrapped the manor and marketed the property as farmland is because I would need permission from Lord Yav, and he would charge a special tax for the destruction of a building commissioned by nobility. I, uh, I don't think we can afford that, Gali said. You're God's damned right we can't, the unnamed dwarf replied. We've got maybe 15 gold total, and that's after an entire winter of hunting. I got 12 golds from the elves, the kobold added. From the elves, I asked. Yes, they comes from different place. They wanted to fight us in the dungeon, but we didn't want to fight. So they traded with us instead. Sold a bunch of stuffs. Oh. The kobold paused and rubbed the back of its neck. What is it? Well, we didn't knows about the mush. Stop talking, I held up a hand. As far as I'm concerned, if the transactions in question took place in the dungeon, it is no business of mine. However, if you tell me of your own volition that you've sold narcotics, I am duty-bound to report you to the proper authorities. Oh, okays. Do you know where the coins come from? South of here's what they said. Likely Kivinor then. I sighed and leaned back. Kivinor coins have more precious metal content than ours do, but only by a third or so. We don't have banks big enough to offer mortgages around here, so I guess the municipality will have to back the loan. You're giving Simith a mortgage? Gali asked with a laugh. Oh no, absolutely not, I grinned. I could never in a million years justify giving a loan to a kobold without a credit history. Then, what are you talking about mortgages for? You went through all the trouble of bringing Lord Simith here to my office, little Gali. My grin widened. I assume you want to see this venture succeed. Sure, but what? Gali was interrupted by the Rebus's hysterical laughter. His confused expression turned from me to Rebus, then back to me. Then a metaphorical dawn shone upon his features. Wait. Of course, some might see me giving my little brother a loan as a conflict of interest, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. Now hold on. Oh, I see, the kobold interrupted. You give Gali the mortgage, and Gali buys the manor, then I pays him back with the profitses. Then the kobolds owns the manor, and we can has our shitty store. Sorry, city store. Exactly, I beamed. Gali looked back and forth between my malicious grin and the excited kobold. It had been a long, long time since I had been able to prank my brother, and I was relishing the moment. It was almost adequate as revenge for the sting crab. The prank also served to ensure that my brother wasn't just pulling my leg. If this is a serious venture, then Gali's name being on the mortgage won't matter at all. If Gali is just messing with me, though... Fuck, my little brother muttered under his breath. Chapter 104. Nick Smith. Adventurer Level 11. Human American. During the uneventful 8 days of travel, I managed to get Larry to give me more information on rapid magic depletion. As it turns out, it can turn deadly if it happens away from civilization, and the body usually prevents it from happening. The latter fact reminded me of a conversation with Ten regarding my muscles, and I pointed out that maybe the reason I didn't have that limiter was because my magic core was artificial. Both Yolk and Larry agreed with my theory, but when I tried to describe the spell that I was trying to do, I received a few baffled looks. They were similar to the look my mum gave my dad when he suggested that our cousin should have marigolds in her wedding bouquet. Instead of being dismissive, though, Larry was kind enough to explain that magic in its purest form was immaterial and required a medium, namely the caster, to interact with the world around it. Magic is omnipresent in this world. If one were able to gather a ball of it and launch it at someone, it would have the same effect that it already does, which happens to be absolutely fucking nothing. Larry did his best to not be condescending, but I couldn't help but feel like an idiot. I cringed at the memory as the cart pulled up next to the stable. Nash was the first off the cart, and he helped Yolk step down. I cracked my neck and gathered my things. Nick, if I have to remind you to grab that fucking sword again, I'm gonna shove it up your ass, Nash growled. I wasn't going to forget it, I shot back, and the only reason I left it in the cart in the first place is because you said we were safe. I regretted the tone I used the moment that the words left my mouth. It made me sound like a whiny child, tired of being chastised by an overbearing parent. Nash, probably picking up on my insecurity, smirked and chuckled. "Well, we were, weren't we?" he asked, then adopted a more serious expression, though that could have changed at any point. "I'm not a fucking oracle, kid, and you know better than to be caught without a weapon." I hopped down from the cart, bag on my back and sword on my waist, and shook my hands at Nash with a grin. "I'm never without a weapon," I said. "I might even be deadlier with magic than with a sword at this point." "Oh? And next you're going to tell me that one weapon is better than two? Or did you forget that there are monsters with resistance to magic?" "Well? Yeah, that's what I fucking thou—" "I would appreciate it if you two would wrap up the squabbling," Yulk interrupted. "Driver, thank you for your service." "Yeah, no problem," the dwarf said. "Yul weren't as bad as I feared. I'll be sticking around here for a while, so if you need a ride back, just ask for Hack." "Will do." Yulk tossed a coin which the driver caught, then began to walk away. Nash and I silently shot glares at each other as we trailed after him. Lari looked back and forth between the two of us and shook his skull. "So where are we going exactly?" I asked. "Shit," Larry and Nash mumbled in unison. "Took him over a week to ask." "You both owe me a silver," Yulk chuckled. "You guys are betting on when I ask stuff now?" I asked, a little hurt. "Yes, for someone who is pretty new to things and going through things that are new even to people who are used to things, you don't ask that many questions," Yulk explained. "Or you wait until the last minute to ask. Lari bet that you would ask about our destination on the first day. I bet that it would take over a week. Nash bet that you wouldn't ask at all. 2 silver each was the bet, if you were wondering." "All right, have your fun at my expense," I sighed dramatically and rolled my eyes. "But are you going to answer my question?" "Sure," Yulk chuckled. "First, we're going to find an inn." "Not just any inn," Nash interjected. "There's got to be a Marfix in the city. You two have been pampered all winter. My turn. We were forced to stay in a luxury hotel whilst one of us studied and the other worked all day." Yulk smirked. "You got to stay home and enjoy Mother's cooking whilst flirting with Nima. Plus, I'm not certain that the Marfix Inn will have a location in Climeta. Do you know, Larry? It has been a very long time since I was here last, so I cannot say for certain," Larry said. "But Climeta is an important trade hub between the mortals and the Wilder of the Grand Climeta Forest. There's a large amount of wealth passing through the city, so it should have fairly modern amenities." "Do they trade with the courts?" I asked. "If the power dynamic has maintained its course, no. The courts used to use intermediaries in their dealings, and they only change begrudgingly. They're also disinterested in wealth and care only for their immediate needs, which isn't particularly conducive to trade relations." "Okay," I nodded, pretending to understand. The subject of the court had come up during the trip, but Yulk had limited knowledge of it, and even though Larry was acting as our guide, he had been cagey regarding certain details. He hadn't said what type of wilder were on the court, but confirmed that they were called queens, regardless of their physical appearance. He told us that the same wilder that run the summer court also run the winter court, but claimed ignorance as to how that works. Something else he told us was that the court is ran by 5 individuals, 3 higher wilder and 2 lower wilder. He wouldn't give us any further details than that, but I felt that it was safe to assume that those terms referred to something like the difference between a Fae and Archfey. As I was ruminating on what we had and hadn't learned thus far, we approached the city gates. They had faded into the background while I was walking and thinking, but once I noticed them, I did a double take. My mouth dropped as I gawked up at the massive walls surrounding the city. Each of the green bricks had a smooth, glassy shine to it and looked a little like the expensive version of the tacky jewels that my Aunt Linda would wear whenever we had a family gathering. As we got closer, I realized that they were taller than I was and roughly twice as wide. The wall stood 8 bricks high, making me feel the smallest I'd ever felt. "Jadi eat," Ten said. "I wonder how they came across so many large deposits." "It's got to be magical fuckery," I inadvertently said aloud. Larry chuckled, snapping me back to reality. Both Nash and Yulk started, as if they were as dumbfounded by the wall as I was. The 3 of us shared a glance, then looked at Larry. "Courtesy of the court," he gestured to the wall as we took our place in line. The winter court, interestingly enough. It was my father that convinced them to build the wall. He performed a favor for each and every brick that they made. That's a lot of effort to go through for others. I can see why his betrayal was such a shock. Yulk nodded slowly. It was. I grew up listening to other people tell me how much of a hero and visionary he was, yet he never talked about any of it. I thought he was being humble, but, well, I still don't know what to make of it, to be honest. Next, a guard said, absent-mindedly interrupting our conversation. We stepped toward the guard, who was distracted with something on the table next to him. He glanced at us and did a double take. It was almost funny until he pointed his spear at us, the extra sharp tip glistening in the sunlight. "Fucking halt there," he ordered. "Are you a god's damned lich?" "This is Larry Visimiro," Yulk hurriedly explained. "He has been officially welcomed into the Empire of Kalkuti and the city of Klimeta." The guard stared at Yulk for a moment, then turned back to Lari. His hesitance made me nervous, but then he gestured to an area to the side of the gate with some benches. "Sit there," he said. "Be warned, any aggressive actions will be met with lethal force." "How long will this take?" Nash asked. "However fucking long it takes. Do as you're told, or go somewhere else, shithead. Or would you rather grow some arrows?" The guard gestured toward the top of the wall. It was difficult to see them, but there were several archers with their bows drawn and trained on us. Nash chuckled and held his hands up. "I was just asking." Yeah. Fuck off and sit down." The guard motioned to another guard as we did as we were told, and took a seat at the benches. The pair talked with each other for a few moments, glancing at Larry every now and then. The second guard nodded and was about to leave, but then he made eye contact with me. "Shit," I muttered. "What is it?" Yulk asked. "You know how they didn't make a big deal out of me?" "Yes. I think they were just distracted by Larry." The guard spoke to the other guard, and they both turned to look at me. The guard who had told us to sit shrugged and nodded at the other guard. The other guard looked worried for a moment, but rushed off. "Ah," Yulk said. "Well, they should have received word about you too, unless we arrived before Jack's messenger." "That would be quite inconvenient," Lari added. "At least the guard's going to go check rather than just turning us away," Nash said with a shrug. "Shows they're a pretty professional outfit." "Well, yes, but they're not a normal city guard," Larry replied. "They are a standing army of professional quality. 1,000 strong last I checked. Probably quite a bit more now, though." "They use an army as a city guard?" "Yes, Klimeta is the only safe path to and from the Grand Klimeta Forest. It is, functionally, a fortress city." "So it guards the forest from invasion?" I asked. "Yes," Larry nodded. "It also guards the Empire of Kalkuti against invasion from the forest, though. Despite the fact that it pays taxes to both the court and the Empire, the city is an independent entity. Again, last I checked. I can't even guess at how many years it's been since I've been here. But if it's an independent entity, what kind of weight will a message from Emperor Jack have?" "Authoritative weight?" Yulk asked with a grin. "Absolutely none. But who is going to buy the stuff that comes out of the forest if Emperor Jack sanctions the city?" "Those that rule and guard the city are bound by a geas to remain impartial in matters of warfare," Larry explained. "The Wilder are not allowed to war with the mortals, and the mortals are not allowed to war with the Wilder. They have to do everything they can to maintain this status quo, which gives the Emperor of Kalkuti quite a bit of diplomatic influence over the city." "A geas? That's an unbreakable promise, right?" I asked. "No promise is unbreakable. A geas simply adds incentives to keep a promise and ensures extreme consequences for breaking it. The Klimeta geas, if it is still in use, will cause oathbreakers to die a very painful and messy death. The only mercy is that the death comes at a rather rapid pace. 30 minutes, which is a very short length of time for breaking a geas. Why would anyone want to take that kind of oath, though? The incentives. In exchange for your service, you get a longer life, immunity to most mortal diseases, a boost to your strength, a larger magic core, great pay, and the right to mingle with the Wilder, should they so choose to have you." "Wait, really?" "Yes. And when you say mingle, you mean—" Larry sighed. "I mean procreate." "I see," I chuckled. "So do the Wilder not mingle with anyone else?" "I'll tell you what my father told me." The Wälder of the Grand Climata forest are very, very old. They have long since lost the tender naivety that allows a being of great power to have gentleness for their partner. They care only for the results of the act itself and whatever pleasures they may glean during the process. A normal mortal would not survive. As such, they only procreate with those who are bound by and benefit from the Gias. How old were you when he told you that? Nash asked with a raised eyebrow. I wasn't a child, if that's what you mean, Larry chuckled. So wait, this is a city full of soldiers with a BDSM kink? I asked. My three comrades stared at me silently for a moment. What is BDSM? Larry asked. It was then that I realized my folly. My exposure to the internet had granted me knowledge of the existence of BDSM, but I didn't even actually know what the letters stood for. All I knew was that it involved whips, chains, domination, and submission in a sexual way, and due to a slip of the tongue, I suddenly found myself in a position where I would have to explain such concepts to my adoptive brothers and a being that is likely several times older than my grandmother, who would then likely ask how I came across such information. Never mind, I stammered. I could have translated that acronym in a way that they understood it, Ten said within my head. You're welcome, by the way. Yeah, thanks. Hey, you lot, the guard shouted at us. Come here. I quickly shot out of my seat, glad for the interruption. Nash watched me gather my belongings with narrowed eyes, but Yulk and Larry rose as if nothing had happened. We walked over to the guard, who was tapping his finger on his spear. Whether it was impatience or nerves was anyone's guess. We got a message from that Emperor guy, he said once we got close enough. It arrived about 20 minutes before you did, though. So, sorry about the inconvenience and whatnot. It's not a problem, Yulk nodded. Sure it is. We've got to let a lich into our city. In case it ain't clear, we're not thrilled about that. So you better be on your best fucking behavior, got it? The guard pointed a finger at Larry. Understood, Larry replied. Good, the guard turned to me. As for you, we don't know what a human is. Sorry, bud, but 'cause of that, we'll also be keeping an eye on you, and people will probably be staring like you're some sort of show. You're probably used to that, but be good and don't let it get to you. Got it, I nodded. All right, go on in. The guard gestured over his shoulder. The gate he gestured to was nearly as impressive as the wall. Two very thick slabs of wood that were stained green distracted from a particularly mean-looking portcullis. It was the only metal that I could see, and came equipped with spikes and blades on either side of it. For a moment I wished that I got to experience the drama of the gate opening slowly to let us enter. Unfortunately, it was already open, so we followed the guard's instruction and passed through it. The city within the wall was just as impressive as the gargantuan construction guarding it. Multi-story stone buildings lined the main road, which was paved with intricately carved stones. As we passed the buildings, I noticed that their walls seemed to be made of solid chunks of stone. There were tool marks as well, indicating that they had been hand-chiseled. Nash and I simultaneously let out a low whistle of appreciation at the craftsmanship. All of the people milling about around us gave me the impression that we had entered into some sort of business district. Dwarves, elves, gnomes, orcs, and even a few drow stopped to stare at us as we passed by. Then I noticed that there were fae and fairies among them. Oh, that's new, Larry said. What is? Yulk asked. The Wilder within the city. That might actually save me some time. You three go to the inn and get some rest. I'm going to find an old friend. I'll meet you at the entrance to the forest in the morning. You sure? Nash asked. Yes, even if the inn were willing to grant me their hospitality in exchange for my coin, it would be wasted on me. This form does not require rest nor sustenance. I also have a great many things to attend to, so remaining idle would be counterproductive. All right, see you tomorrow then. Larry gave us a small bow and separated from us, heading down a side street. We walked along the main road for another minute or so before I realized something. Wasn't he supposed to be our guide? I asked. Chapter 105. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 11, Human American. Larry has not been to this city for quite a long time, Yulk pointed out. He told me as such when I sought his guidance for the Wilder and the Summer Court. Then shouldn't we be worried that he'll get lost? I asked. No, Nash replied. He's an adult, one who's probably older than all of us combined. He knows what he's doing. I nodded uncertainly as we continued down the main road and strove to put my worries about Larry from my mind as the business district turned into a shopping district. This change was marked by a steep increase in crowd density, which made it more difficult to keep pace with Yulk and Nash. Various restaurants, shops, and offices lined the road. A few of them caught my eye as we passed, despite all of the people in the way. The first was a jewelry store that had to stop near to allow a cart to pass. Rings, necklaces, earrings, and bracelets encrusted with the largest and shiniest gems I'd ever seen were on display. At first glance, it was a lavish display of wealth, but something felt off. All silver and bronze, Nash chuckled. Guess the rumors of a gold shortage in these parts is true. That's a shame, Yulk sighed. The malleability of gold is good for intricate enchantments and glyphs. I'd love to find out what could be applied to a golden ring with gems this size. The gems are probably magically enhanced. Does that have an impact on enchantments? No idea, but it would be wonderful to find out. Yeah, I bet. Don't you go wasting our hard-earned coin on your scientific ventures now. Bah, what good is gold if not to be used to satisfy one's whims? Yulk chuckled and winked. Nash met his mirth with a cold stare as we continued on our way. The next notable store was a weapons seller. What made it notable, though, was its lack of stock. The displays in the windows were completely empty, and a closer look at the interior as we passed showed that there weren't many items hanging on the walls either. That's probably not a good sign, right? I asked. What isn't? Yulk turned to me with a raised eyebrow. The almost empty weapon shop, probably, Nash said. I'd say that it depends. There's a bunch of reasons that a weapon shop could run out of inventory, and not all of them are impactful to the rest of us. For instance, if that Fae behind the counter just recently bought the store, it might have decided to get rid of the iron and steel inventory. Or maybe it's just that much more difficult to find good weapons made of other metals. There was a Fae behind the counter, I asked. Yep, I may be green, but elves never are. Which means that was a Fae. Or maybe an archfey. I glanced back with a new interest, but we had already moved on. Then I wondered what kind of weapons someone who couldn't work with iron would make, and promptly remembered the Bronze Age. But the Wilder would have to make some really good stuff to compete with steel, right? Unfortunately, my brothers didn't seem all that curious. After walking a bit more, we came across some kind of restaurant. The wall facing the street was made of glass, and there were tables both inside and outside. Fairies were fluttering around, grabbing pastries and other baked goods from shelves lining the walls and delivering them to the tables. There was even a line to get in that stretched down a side street. Yulk let out a low whistle. That's not something you'll see me doing anytime soon, he said. How come? Nash asked. Everything I've heard and read indicates one should use caution and care when Wilder are offering treats, even in trade. I had also heard some stories, but I thought it was specifically refusing the goods that was the issue. I nearly spoke up, then remembered that we weren't in my world anymore. Even though the Wilder here were similar to the fair folk back home, there were notable differences. Why would you need to be cautious? Nash asked. Are they poisoned or something? Sometimes, Yulk nodded, though sometimes the treat is enchanted. I recall an account of a dwarf who stumbled upon a fairy grove. He was offered food and shelter and accepted it without a second thought. The fairies gave him cookies and tea, and when he drank them, his body began to twist and contort. He fled from the fairies and barely made it to the nearest village before his death, mangled beyond all recognition. Ha! I recognize that tale, a voice rang out from behind us. We turned and saw a very plump and androgynous fairy with a wide grin. Its wings were flapping like a hummingbird's, giving the appearance that it was struggling to stay airborne. Its skin was mottled, with green patches on its otherwise teal complexion. Its appearance made me think of a cherub who had grown up. Pretty sure that story was about Nilrin's circle, the fairy laughed. A great prank, to be sure. Well, as long as you know the context. The dwarf was a criminal, a rapist, murderer, and thief. The reason he was wandering through the forest in the first place was because he was on the run from the law. Nilrin's the type that doesn't take kindly to criminals who come a-begging. All the cookies did was make the dwarf's outside look like its insides. I see. Thank you for the additional context. Yulk bowed a little. No problem. Haven't heard anybody mention that in ages. You must be one of them scholarly types, right? What's your name? You want my name? Yulk asked with a slight smile. I see I was right about you being a scholar, the fairy giggled. But nah, I just want to know it. I already got a name of my own. It's Kint. It is a pleasure to meet you, Kint. I am Yulk Alta. These are my brothers, Nash and Nick. Nice to meet you too. Yulk, Nash and Nick Alta, eh? I've heard that name before, haven't I? Yes, our clan is quite famous in the unified chiefdoms. My last name's Smith, actually, I said. I'm adopted. Well, yeah, I figured that when an orc calls an elf brother, something has to be going. Hold on. The fairy fluttered a little closer and looked me up and down. You're not an elf. Nope, I'm a human. Yeah, I know. What are you doing here? Well, we're going to meet with the summer court, I replied hesitantly. Why do you ask? Oh, no real reason. Never mind me. Kint shook its head and smiled. I was just curious is all. So you're meeting with the court, eh? Do they know you're a human, or is it going to come as a surprise, do you think? I'm sure they've been made aware, Yulk said. Are you familiar with humans? Well, not personally, no. I've heard some really old stories, but it's been so long that none of them are coming to mind. Where are you from, Nick? With a small sigh, I relayed the tale of how Nash found me in a dungeon. The fairy's expression betrayed empathy and concern, but also curiosity. Where's the rest of your kind at? It asked, curiosity winning the day. I don't know. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only human in this world. There were others, but they've probably been gone for a long time, I explained. I see. I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Kint flew closer and patted me on the shoulder. Thanks for telling me your tale, though. Oh wait, shit, guess that means I owe you one. I dash. Nah, don't argue. It's easier for all of us if we just roll with it. Is there anything I can help you with so I don't owe you anymore? We are looking for the Marfix Inn, Yulk interjected, assuming there is one in this city. Oh, sure there is. Just keep going down the main road. It's right next to the keep. There's no way to miss it. It's the gaudiest building in the city, Kint chuckled. Course, only the rich visitors stay there. Pretty much just wealthy merchants and nobles who aren't invited to stay in the keep. You lot don't strike me as their typical patrons. We rescued the owner's nephew, Nash said. He set us up with free food and board. Truly? What luck. Well, I personally wouldn't consider it luck, but you mortals love luxuries. I bet you have some higher ones looking after you. Nash and Yulk glanced at me, and I tried my best not to sigh. Looking after me is one way to describe it, I suppose. Stalking me is another. Well, I'm guessing since you're looking for an inn, you've probably just rolled into town and are feeling pretty tired, Kint said. I'll let you find your rest. Maybe we'll run into each other again, if it's fated. We can swap some more tales. I hope we do, Yulk bowed. May you find your way clear of turmoil. And may you find your way in the first place, the fairy laughed. Hot damn, you really are a scholar. Haven't heard that parting in a long while. Anyway, have a good one. You too, Nash and I said as the fairy fluttered or sputtered away. Aren't Wilder able to control their shapes? Nash asked as we began to walk again. I believe so, yes, Yulk said. I'm fairly certain that I've read that the more powerful the Wilder, the more control they have over their physical form, though. That would imply that there are limits to what they can change about their bodies. I see. As we got further into the city, we slowly stopped seeing shops and started seeing residential buildings. It was easy to tell the difference because most of the shops had their doors facing the main road, but the houses and apartments were positioned to open up into the side streets and alleys. Plus, there weren't as many people. The lack of people ended up having some pros and cons. On the upside, it was easier to keep up with Yulk and Nash. On the downside, people could see me more clearly, and almost all of them began to stare. I briefly considered making myself some prosthetic ears so people would just think I was an elf, but gave up on the idea pretty quickly. Then the keep came into view, banishing all thoughts of trailing eyes from my mind. The wall was impressive, but the keep was in an entirely different league. Like the walls, it was made of jadeite, but the bricks of the keep seemed much larger than the ones that made up the walls, And as we got closer, I realized that each and every one of the bricks were engraved and embossed with gold. Are those glyphs? I asked. I believe so, yes, Yulk replied. I'm hardly an authority on the matter, but I would imagine that one would require some very powerful glyphs to keep any kind of building safe from the might of the Wilder. Are they shield glyphs? Nash asked. No, shield glyphs would prevent all access to the keep. What we're seeing are probably fortification and anti-magic glyphs. It wouldn't surprise me if they had some shield glyphs ready to deploy, though. The houses and apartments suddenly turned into inns and taverns. The closer we got to the keep, the fancier these buildings became. Gold and silver trim began appearing more often and in more intricate designs, and I genuinely wondered how the Marfix could be considered gaudy in comparison. Then a building made entirely of gold bricks came into view. Holy shit, I muttered. God's damn, you really can't miss it, Nash commented. It's almost worth the coin to stay elsewhere, Yulk said with an air of disgust. No, it isn't. What's with you trying to spend all our coin? What good is it if we don't spend it? Money is always better to have than to spend, I said, parroting my father. You'll get your chance to spend it because life is full of unexpected expenses. Yulk slowly turned to look at me as if I had just sheathed my dagger in his back. Unexpected expenses, Nash laughed, like someone notching their sword by swinging it at a fucking brick wall. Precisely, I said, or someone notching their axe by swinging it at reinforced glass. Nash stopped in the middle of the road and treated me to a cold stare. To be clear, you little shit, I was trying to rescue you, he said. Plus, an axe has a much higher chance of making it through glass than a sword has of making it through brick. What do you mean? I asked with a hint of sarcasm and while spreading my hands innocently. I was just pointing out a potential unexpected expense. I suppose insulting your future wife and having to make it up to her with an expensive gift could also be considered an unexpected expense, Yulk added with a wink. Exactly. Fuck you both, Nash growled. The point is that we need to save our money, so we'll be staying in that God's damned golden eyesore. Let's go. Yulk and I laughed as we continued walking toward the inn. 2 extra-large golden doors automatically opened for us, and we entered the inn. Thankfully, the building was a lot less gaudy on the inside. The walls and floors were made of dark, treated wood, and tasteful gold and silver inlays decorating each piece. There were no guests in the lobby, but there were a few staff making themselves useful and avoiding eye contact. Hello, welcome to the Marfix Inn, the receptionist said as we approached. How can I help you? We would like to book 3 rooms, please, Yulk said. The receptionist smiled widely enough that his eyes closed and tilted his head in a condescending manner. I'm afraid our luxury accommodations are rather in demand, and as such, they are quite expensive. 3 rooms will cost. The receptionist paused as we held out our pendants. He bent toward us and studied the pendants. Once he verified their authenticity, he quickly changed his demeanor and bowed nervously. My apologies, honored guests. Would you like adjacent rooms? Yes, please, Yulk replied. Understood. I beg your patience for a moment. The receptionist quickly turned to the desk beside him and pulled out a book. He then grabbed a pen, wrote in the book, and retrieved 3 keys from a cabinet next to the desk. Here you are. Thank you for both your patience and your patronage, sirs, he said with another nervous bow, offering the keys to us. Your rooms are on the 1st floor. To find them, please proceed through that door and turn left. They are the first 3 doors on your right. The dining area is in the main foyer, and our other amenities are located in the west wing. Much appreciated, Nash said, taking his key. Once Yulk and I took our keys from him, the receptionist righted himself and smiled at us again. The smile faltered when his gaze fell on me, but his professionalism kept his expression from changing too much. I sighed softly, and we followed the receptionist's instructions to reach our rooms. I'm beat, Nash said. Think I'm going to skip dinner and head straight to bed. Yes, that was quite the walk, Yulk agreed. Also, I find that I'm still quite full from the jerky this morning, so I'll be retiring as well. All right, good night, I said, unlocking my door. See you at breakfast. My brothers replied in kind as I stepped into my room. I closed the door behind me, popped my neck with a sigh, and began to take off my filthy gear and clothes. Once my stuff was stowed in the cleaning slots, I found the bathroom and started the shower. As the water poured down my weary body, I began to wonder about what the next day would bring. There was a chance that this could be the end of the journey. So far, it had very much felt like I'd been getting the runaround, but dare I hope that the court will have the answers that I need. Will I finally find out how I can get home, back to Cass and my family? If so, will I still have magic when I get there? My skills? Will I have to leave immediately, or will I get a chance to say a proper goodbye to everyone? I dried myself off and plopped into the comfortable bed with another sigh. Only tomorrow will tell. Chapter 106. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 11, Human American. We ended up eating our breakfast pretty quickly. To avoid delay and Nash's bitching, I opted to order the same as my brothers instead of requesting customizations. We were served a bunch of fatty meats on what appeared to be some sort of charcuterie board, and I could almost feel my cholesterol rise as I ate. Not long after finishing our unbalanced breakfast, we made our way to the entrance of the Grand Climeta forest. To accomplish this, we had to go back up the main road and take the largest of the side roads to another massive gate. Like the entrance to the city, the gate was guarded. Unlike the entrance to the city, though, the gate was closed. The chance for me to see the dramatic opening of the gigantic gate had me excited for a moment. Unfortunately, as we approached and I noticed more details, that excitement ebbed. The first detail I noticed was that the guards were a mix of Mer and Wilder. Actually, mix might not be the right word, because they were wearing different uniforms and appeared to be stationed on opposite sides of the gate. The Wilder were on our right, and the Mer were on our left. The way they were positioned and avoiding interaction with each other felt tense. The second detail I noticed was much more stressful, though. On our left was a bench surrounded by 4 pike-wielding orcish guards who looked extremely nervous. Sitting upon the bench was Larry, who gave us a slight nod. "Fucking hells," Nash muttered. Yulk held up his hands as we approached the guards in an attempt to soothe them. It didn't seem to work, though. Instead of calming down, one of the guards pointed his pike in our direction. "Identify yourselves," the orcish guard ordered. "We are the companions of Lari Visimiro. I am Yulk Alta, this is Nash Alta, and this is Nick Smith," Yulk explained. The guard hesitated for a moment and glanced at the other 3 standing by the bench, but they remained expressionless. "Since when does the famed Alta clan consort with leeches?" the guard demanded. "Since the Emperor of Calcuti and the High Chief of the United Chiefdoms do, I suppose. Well, we actually became friends with Larry a bit before their association with him, but that's neither here nor there." "You dare to reply with sarcasm," the guard shouted, raising his pike threateningly. "You don't want to do that," Nash replied, calmly placing his hand on the handle of his axe. "You don't get to tell me what." "Man, stand down," someone shouted. We turned to see a grumpy-looking dwarf in guard armor jogging in our direction. The orc that had threatened us snapped to attention and lost a few shades of color, and the other guards visibly winced. The dwarf approached us, huffing and puffing angrily. "What the fuck do you think you're doing, man?" he screamed. "Well, sir, Who the fuck told you to talk, dirtbag? I don't care about your fucking excuses, because you sure as fuck weren't doing as you were fucking told. Repeat your orders, shit for brains." I was to guard the lich." Marn trailed off and stared straight ahead. "Oh, so you only remember half of your orders," the dwarf shouted, almost foaming at the mouth. "I guess that makes sense, since you're a fucking half-brained cunt." Marn remained silent and kept his gaze straight. My brothers and I shared a glance. Nash shrugged and took his hand off of his axe. "I told your dumbass to make sure the lich behaves himself until his fucking party arrives," the dwarf growled, then gestured at us. "Am I mistaken in believing that's his party?" "They have identified themselves as such, sir," a different guard chimed in. The dwarf glared at the other, who continued to stare straight ahead. "Marn may have fucked up, but you fucked up by not correcting him. All 4 of you dipshits get to jog the wall. Go." Without any sort of argument, the guards began to run along the wall. Once they were a decent distance away, the dwarf turned to us and nodded apologetically. "Sorry about that. Good help is hard to find these days," he said. "I'm Halvor, Sergeant of the Western Gate." "And you?" "I'm Yulk Alta. These are my brothers, Nash and Nick." "Glad to make your acquaintance. So you three and the Lich are headed through the gate to meet with the summer court? Yes. All right, speak to the wilder guards. They'll decide whether or not to let you through. Be careful in the forest. We will? Halvor gave Lari a curt nod and walked away. We watched him go for a moment, then began walking toward the gate. The wilder guards, who had been watching the entire exchange in silence, held their hands out to stop us. Who goes there? The Fae on our left asked. We have been approved to meet with the summer court, Lari said. I am Lari Visimiro. My companions go by Yulk Alta, Nash Alta, and Nick Smith. I recognize you, Lich, the Fae on our right said. You are early for your appointment. Previous experience with the Wilder has taught me that it is better to be early than it is to be late. That isn't true for every situation, but I take your point. You are expected and will be allowed passage. Be warned of two things. First, you may have to wait to see the queens. The waiting area is designed for Wilder and will not account for mortal amenities. This will not be an issue for the Lich, but it might be for... The left Fae paused as it looked at me, then gathered its senses. It might be for the rest of you. Thank you for this warning, Yulk said. This is a duty, not a gratuity, orc. The second warning is that we do not police our forest. You may encounter many things that will wish death upon you. Be prepared. We are, Larry said solemnly. Then you may proceed. May your appointment be productive and your journey uneventful. The left Fae raised its left hand and spread its fingers with its ring finger lowered. The right Fae repeated the gesture with its right hand, and the gate began to open. I held my breath in anticipation. The sheer size of the gate had led me to develop many expectations for what I would experience when it opened. I expected a rumbling to shake the ground beneath my feet and a sound loud enough to drown out everything else to storm my ears. Instead, I watched the impressive construction swing open, quickly and quietly. The fuck? I whispered. Yulk and Nash also looked unnerved, and both Fae grinned at our surprised expressions. Beyond the gate was another cruel-looking portcullis, which began to raise without a sound. Once the way was clear, Nash let out a sigh. Magical fuckery, he said. Indeed it is, the right Fae laughed. Have a nice hike. We passed through the pair of grinning guards and left the city. The outside of the wall looked exactly like the wall we had encountered when we arrived the day prior. But instead of farmland and countryside, there was a dense, stifling forest ahead of us. The trees seemed to make their own wall, as if to oppose or spite the one made of jadeite. There was a small clearing surrounding the wall, and I wondered how we were going to actually enter the forest. There is a trail to the north, Lari said, as if reading my mind. We'll want to remain close to the trail and each other, even within clearings. Agreed, Nash said. Yulk and I nodded, and we all began to hunt for the trail. Did your friend tell you about this trail? Nash asked. Yes. Showed it to me, in fact, Larry replied. Showed it to you? You left the city last night? No, my friend specializes in scrying. What's that? I asked. The ability to use a medium to see things that are well outside of your perception. Who was the subject? Yulk asked. No one, Larry replied as we found the trail. My friend is an experienced scryer and can freehand it, as they say, up to a certain distance. That's incredible. How foresightful of you to seek the aid of a scryer to help us get to the court. Well, that was not actually my intention. I was only made aware of the ability to scry without a specific target once my main goal had been accomplished. And what was your main goal? Nash asked suspiciously. I simply wanted to see how the kobolds were doing in my absence. Speaking of which, I'd like to stop by Talakam on our way back to Kirkana. That bad, huh? No, perhaps the opposite even. It is unclear. We are too far for the scry to pick up voices, but Lord Simith and several other kobolds and bakobolds were being entertained with food and drink in a tavern surrounded by several mere. I would very much like to hear from their own mouths how this came to pass, and be certain that they aren't being taken advantage of. Taken advantage of? How? I asked. Kobolds are intelligent, but their thought processes tend to be naive and whimsical. They are overconfident that they know how the world around them works, and tend to make decisions based on incomplete knowledge. It wouldn't take much persuasion, for instance, to convince them that it's better to rob caravans than it is to trade with them. and I did not have the foresight to directly order them to abstain from robbing anyone. Ah, I get it now. So what's a bakerbold? A bigger, meaner version of a kobold, Nash said. Bakerbolds are, allegedly, the result of attempts by powerful mages to turn kobolds into infantry, Yulk added. On average, they are as large as an orc and as intelligent as a normal kobold. That's correct, and it isn't alleged, Lari sighed. I would add that they are incapable of breeding and are born at random from normal kobold egg clutches. I was initially nervous about their inclusion to the dungeon, but the ones brought from the wastes seemed quite well-mannered. Don't kobolds breed quite rapidly? Nash asked. If so, there's probably more bakerbolds than there used to be. Their clutches don't typically exceed 5 eggs, but they can mate as often as Mer can, with an incubation period of 6 months. It also takes 2 years for them to reach adolescence and a further 2 to reach adulthood. So not quite as quickly as one initially imagines. As Lari finished his sentence, we found the trail through the forest. Our urge to talk disappeared the moment we stepped onto the trail. It was wide enough for 2 carts to travel side by side with plenty of room, but the massive trees caused it to feel claustrophobic. Despite our silence, it was not a quiet journey. The creaking of wood, both living and long dead, birds screaming to one another about various observations, and the whistling of wind through dense branches created a nearly deafening cacophony. We suffered through it, and after an hour we entered our first clearing. The trail was clearly stamped through the clearing, with no changes in size. This struck me as odd, and it took me a moment to figure out why. Normally, when hiking a trail through a forest, it will get bigger at clearings because of camps and rest stops. The fact that the trail remained the same through the clearing indicated that the clearing was not a safe spot to rest. My dad taught me that usually big predators were the only ones willing to enter clearings, but the trees around the clearing were stiflingly close to one another. Something the size of a bear definitely wouldn't fit through them. So what had made this clearing unsafe? Thankfully, we didn't find out, but as we continued our hike, more oddities became noticeable. Tall trees standing strong despite being strangled by vines practically dripping with poison. Thorn bushes that seemed to reach for us as we passed. Birds and other small animals with crazed eyes glaring at us with unmistakable hostility. The guard had said that the wilder don't police the forest. After traveling through it for a few hours, I couldn't help but wonder why. Was it because the hostility of the forest guarded them? Or was it because doing so wasn't within their power? We continued through another clearing that travelers had deemed unsafe. Rings of mushrooms were barely visible through the grass and moss growing on either side of the trail. I vaguely recalled that these were known as fairy rings back home and made a guess as to what caused these clearings to be deemed unsafe. I barely managed to suppress a shudder that threatened to travel down my spine. When I created the bullet spell, I'd felt pretty good about how powerful I had become. I'd even gone so far as to brag to Nash about it. As I looked around, though, I realized how little that spell would do for me if the forest decided to wipe us out. Even if the people back home opted to conquer a forest like this, it would take everything they had and cost a lot of lives. We pressed on, though, and finally came to a portion of the forest that was less oppressive. The trees grew apart, the growths seemed less bloodthirsty. Without even realizing it, I let out a sigh of relief. "We're not in the clear yet," Nash whispered. "This part of the forest is probably more dang." Nash's words of wisdom were rudely interrupted by a loud hiss and the sounds of things rapidly moving around us. Lari and Yulk readied themselves as Nash and I drew out weapons. 4 huge reptilians with mean-looking claws jumped out at us from behind the trees. "Labarif Sak," Yulk shouted. The fireball leapt from Yulk's hands and engulfed one of the giant lizards. The other 3 paused for a moment, and Nash used that moment to cleave another one's head from its shoulders with his axe. The remaining lizards spat at us, but we were able to avoid the disgusting projectiles. "Reptians," Nash called out. Reptians. I remembered what a certain bartender had told me about them. 6-inch claws, paralytic spit, hunting in groups. A glance at their hands and feet confirmed the size of their claws. "Ninthgil Tsak," Larry said, hands outstretched. A bolt of electricity leapt from the lich and smashed into a reptian. With a scream, it fell over and began to spasm with both white and black smoke streaming from its face. The last Reptian looked at its three comrades and turned to me with a snarl. Fighting it with my sword would have been a bad idea. It had weapons on the end of each limb, and the closer I got to it, the easier it would be for it to strike me with its venom. Instead, I held out a finger and gathered my magic. Telebtsak, I whispered. The bullet formed in front of my finger and launched itself before anyone could react. The Reptian had been puffing itself up, but before it could spit or roar or whatever it was about to do, its head instantly transformed into a pink mist. I noted a small puff come from the tree behind the Reptian, likely where the bullet landed, as the monster's body crumpled to the ground. "Ow," someone said. "That was quite uncalled for." "What?" I asked, looking around. "Who said that?" Nash demanded. "Wait, was it the Dash?" "I said that." The tree that the bullet struck began to shake, and we were suddenly looking at a face made of bark. A face that seemed to be quite upset with us. Naturally, we stared in disbelief. I realized that it's quite often a case of kill or be killed with you animal types, but one would think that injuring another accidentally would warrant an apology, the tree shouted. "Oh, right, I'm sorry," I stammered. "I really didn't mean to hit you with that spell." "It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't." "You can talk?" Nash asked. "Most of us can." A face formed on another tree. "It's quite distasteful to do so with an animal, though, even in anger." "Shut up," the first tree demanded. "When one is injured, one should seek restitution." "Restitution?" I asked. "What kind of restitution?" "Well, truth be told, an apology is probably good enough," the tree's branches shrugged. "But if you're feeling really sorry, you can drag those bodies over to me. That would certainly help me repair this new hole I've developed." I glanced at my comrades. Nash was looking confused, Yulk was looking bemused, and it was difficult to tell if Lari was surprised or not because he didn't have eyebrows. I returned my attention to the tree. "Oh, okay," I said. "Nash, a little help." "You're the one who injured the tree." Nash shook his head. I'll watch your back." I glared at him angrily, but he didn't relent. With a sigh, I began to drag the Reptian that I had killed to the base of the injured tree. A thin root pushed it way up from the ground and gently wrapped around the dead monster. "Oh yeah, that's the stuff," the tree murmured with glee. "I do believe that's good enough," the other tree said. "That corpse is more than sufficient to give you the nutrients needed to repair yourself. One shouldn't be greedy." "Oh, fine. Your recompense is satisfactory. Be on your way, animals." "Wait," I said. "I had some No." The monster corpse was suddenly and violently dragged into the ground, which caused me to jump back. I looked at the trees, but their faces were gone. I nervously backed toward my party and returned to the trail. "Well, that was interesting," Larry said. "Let's continue." Chapter 107, Master Vampire Kirain Yith, Adventurer Level NA, Drow Master Vampire, Balushanian. I took a sip from a goblet of blood as I examined the rest of the table. Count Heseth, my primary aide, was seated to my right. Across from Heseth sat Thalamus, who was also acting as an aide. He was seated to the right of the one he was aiding, none other than Hergarus the Decimator. I had learned a lot more about him during my stay in the Hells. As it turns out, he has an odd history, even for a demon. Thalamus had eagerly explained to me that Hergarus, unlike most demons, had been bound to his flesh for millennia. The reason for this was simple. He was extremely powerful and had put too much of his power into his regenerative capabilities. Hergarus had been obsessed with flesh. He studied it as much as he could, coveting it. When it came time for him to create a body of his own, he used his knowledge to carefully craft one that could regenerate at an extraordinary rate. These regenerative capabilities far surpass my own and even those of other, stronger demons. Unfortunately for him, this meant that his physical form was almost impossible to destroy. This resulted in a very interesting situation. While a demon is inhabiting their physical form, they are reliant upon their physicality. At some point in the distant past, Hergarus suffered an injury that damaged his brain and gave him amnesia. As a result, he completely forgot how to unbind himself from his body. And since he could no longer willingly unbind himself, this left him trapped in his mortal coil until said body could be completely destroyed. I found it to be a rather humorous form of poetic justice. A demon made itself a suit of flesh to torment those who are forced to wear one, only to be forced to continue wearing it himself. An inarguably hellish existence. "How go the preparations?" Marquess Naberius asked. My seat was directly to the right of the Marquess, and Hergerus was sitting to his left. Our positioning, both deliberate and subtle, was not lost on me. Naberius meant to flatter me by placing me on his right. Or perhaps he meant to anger his demonic commanders. From the glares I kept getting, the latter was definitely plausible. "The legions have nearly finished reforming," Hergarus's deep voice rumbled from across the table. "As per your instructions, we have replaced those that failed to reform with oathbreakers." "Oathbreakers?" I asked. "Ah yes, that must sound quite suspect," Naberius laughed. "Worry not, Master Vampire. An oathbreaker is simply a demon who is willing to serve whomever will benefit them the most. A mercenary, though not for coin. Their motivations are quite simple. They wish for either pleasure or power. This invasion has the potential to grant both in large amounts. They will be disposed of upon our success." Hergarus nodded. "They cannot be trusted to stand alongside the legions and defend our holdings. They are certainly more trustworthy than the true flesh we're allowing to tag along," one of the demon commanders said with a bitter tone. The Marquess stared coldly at the demon until she began to quake in fear. My. There certainly is a lot of impudence amongst my commanders as of late." Naberius's gaze swept the table. "Perhaps you believe that you are indispensable because I do not have the patience to replace you. Foolish. It would only delay things by a year or two to empower commanders who are able to still their waggling faceworms." Hergarus looked unworried, but all of the other demons froze in their seats. It was obvious what they were thinking. Would Marquess Naberius actually kill all of his commanders just before an invasion, or was he bluffing? "Nothing to say," the Marquess laughed. "Of course, I wouldn't want to inconvenience our guests." "It is no inconvenience to me or mine," I said, as Naberius's gaze fell upon me. "I care only for success. Whether it happens now or in a few years is inconsequential." "Well, there you have it." "Please, sire," the female demon stammered, "we are yours to punish as you see fit, but allow us the honor of remaining yours." The demon commanders began a staring contest with the table, unable to lock eyes with Naberius. I could practically feel the fear rise in them as his gaze washed over them, one by one. A spark of jealousy lit within me. I held dominion over the vampires, but not through fear or respect. They did as I commanded because of a quirk of our evolution, an ability rather than actual power. But as the Marquess rubbed his chin, debating what to do next, I realized that the actual power that he has must be exhausting. "I suppose it would be a shame to delay what we have worked so hard to achieve," Naberius said after another moment. "Any further insolence would also be a shame, though, so mind yourselves." The demons nodded silently, still avoiding eye contact. "What do our spies report?" "Bolisir and the Empire of Calcuti have withdrawn and dispersed their armies," Thalamus said. "The main host of the unified chiefdoms have split apart and returned to their respective chiefdoms, but only 2 of the chiefs have dispersed their armies. The rest are still on high alert and even patrolling. Then perhaps we will focus our efforts on the dwarves and the elves, whilst holding a legion or 2 in reserve. Once the orcs move to aid their allies, we can invade the less defended chiefdoms with our reserves." "And what of the Night Kingdom?" I asked. "It has been merged with the unified chiefdoms, and several of the new great chiefs are maintaining their standing armies," Thalamus replied. "Oh, slightly off topic. We have abducted several mortals who can be turned into vampires. A total of 72. It would have been more, but we're trying to remain subtle." "Indeed," Naberius chuckled. "Wouldn't want the mortals to realize our plans before we enact them." I nodded slowly. If one were to judge by the sparring sessions, a full vampire is worth twice its weight in demons. 72 was not the paltry amount that it seemed to be at first glance. "And what of the other nations?" I asked. "Bolisir, Calcuti, and the unified chiefdoms have the largest plain rips," Naberius explained. They will serve as our foothold and staging ground for further excursions. If all goes well, we will hold the entire continent within 5 years, even with the expected angelic interference. Then we will build ships and begin our invasion of the other continents. Your role, however, is to simply take and hold the Night Kingdom. I see. Should you desire it, we can discuss expanding your role when it becomes more relevant, as well as additional rewards. Until then, though, it would be best for you to focus on the task at hand. I nodded, unsure of whether or not I would want to help the demons once the Night Kingdom was mine. On the one hand, the rewards would likely be well worth the trouble. On the other hand, the more I help the demons, the fewer casualties they will take. If they decide to turn on me once they've conquered everything else, it would be best for them to be as weak as possible. Prepare the legions, Naberius said. We will march soon. The demons bowed their heads as the Marquess rose from his seat and left the room. I was the next to rise, with Count Heseth quickly following suit. I felt several glares at my back as I left the conference room. Even if Marquess Naberius didn't betray me, one of his commanders might. Get us ready to fight, I said. I am going to find our new recruits. Yes, my liege, Heseth bowed and scurried off. Once the Count was out of sight, I realized that I didn't actually know where the demons were keeping the mortals. After checking what I incorrectly estimated would be the most likely locations, I asked a passing demon for guidance. It happily took me to where the mortals were being kept. It was a large room, one of many that I hadn't been in before. Poles ran down its center, and several chains were attached to the top of each pole. Naturally, there were orcs, elves, gnomes, and dwarves attached to these chains. 72 of them in total. Am I meant to convert them all? I asked with a little laugh. I do not know, sir, the demon said with a bow. This is not my area of expertise. Oh, what is your area of expertise then? Well, fighting, killing, and torturing. And cooking as it happens, but that tends to be a lot less relevant. Cooking. I raised an eyebrow. What use does a demon have for cooking? Very, very little, sir. The demon let out a sigh of existential angst. Well, we all must have our hobbies, I suppose. There is one more task I would have you do for me. Retrieve whomever is in charge of all of this. I would have them advise me. Yes, sir. The demon bowed, then left to find someone who could provide the information that I needed. I was certain that the demons had a particular order of operations in mind, and I didn't want to offend the Marquess by acting on my own volition. As I turned to examine the captives, their stench hit me. The conditions in which they were being kept were unsanitary, to say the least. The stench of piss, shit, and sweat hit me all at once. I began to raise my hand to my face to block the offensive odor, but another smell froze me in my tracks. The delightful scent of blood. Fresh blood, still being pumped through veins and arteries. The stale blood that the demons had provided was enough to meet my needs and slake my thirst. However, cold blood from a goblet is not nearly as appetizing as having it straight from the source. The temptation was overwhelming. I finished covering my nose and tried to think of something else, but I'd already caught the scent. I dimly realized that I had taken several steps forward and struggled to stop myself. It was too late. Blood tasted so much better as a master vampire than it did when I was a half-breed. No, it wasn't simply the taste. There was a feeling to it, a sense of euphoria. Like having a source of stress suddenly disappear, like having the tightness in your muscles rapidly alleviated, like experiencing every possible relief at once. It was very nearly the absolute peak of pleasure. There was only one higher peak, and that was converting a mer into a vampire. Vaguely, I was aware of the screams, of the panic and fear that suddenly filled the room. But I had fully lost myself, completely subject to the whims of ecstasy. Some of them probably tried to fight me, but I didn't feel any pain. Only the warmth of the blood rushing into my mouth and down my throat. Only the rapturous delight of the conversions. Then it was done, and I was left standing in a room full of newly crafted vampires. My influence met their wills and completely overwhelmed them. They were fully within my power, like my servants in the dungeon had been. The blood in my throat caused the sound of my laughter to take on a much more ominous tone than usual, which only served to make me laugh harder. The door opened, and my new vampires turned to watch two demons enter the room. The first to enter was the demon that had escorted me. Following close behind him was none other than Hirgarus the Decimator. "I see you have resolved your dilemma unaided," Hirgarus said, glaring at the other demon. "My time has been wasted." My apologies, sire," the other demon groveled. I didn't know for sure how to answer. I have seen people killed in many, many ways. Hanging, beheading, prodded to death with red-hot instruments, ripped to shreds by beasts, and torn to pieces by Hanases. Hirgarus showed me something new by, well, there's no other way to describe it. He backhanded the demon in half. It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, the demon was quivering and making excuses for an admittedly minor foible. The next, his upper half was smashed flat against the wall. Ichor flooded out of the demon's lower half as it fell to the ground with a disgusting plop. "I don't believe he was at fault. I really did ask him to retrieve someone," I said. "It is no great loss," Hirgarus replied, wiping his hand with a cloth. "He was an oath-breaker and not to be trusted. His indecisiveness was caused by weakness, and that weakness can only serve to make me stronger." "I see." The room began to waver a bit, but I casually leaned against the wall to mask my overindulgence. "You are filthy, and I can sense your vertigo," Hirgarus said. "I am returning to my duties. You should get cleaned up and take a rest." "Sound advice," I nodded, instantly regretting the head movement. "What do we do with these ones?" The vampires watched us silently, still covered in their mortal mess. I felt some of them hope for better accommodations. Others regretted their choice to convert. "I'll have someone cleanse and transfer them." Hirgarus waved a hand dismissively and left the way he came. I suddenly felt the weight of my vampires staring at me and pushed them to avert their gaze. Their chains rattled as, in unison, they stared at the floor. Another wave of fatigue crashed into me, and I left to find my room. By the time I was halfway there, my brain was swimming whilst my body plodded along. I came to my senses briefly as I entered my chambers and debated whether or not to bathe. My exhaustion made some very good arguments, so in the end I compromised by removing my clothing before climbing into bed. The moment my head hit the pillow, I found myself suspended in a never-ending expanse of white. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This bright void, completely free of any form of shadow, seemed to permeate throughout the entirety of my being. It was quite uncomfortable. "What a vile thing you are," a voice said from behind me, "but you don't have to be." Confused and insulted, I turned to confront my harasser. Instead, I found myself face to face with the nude form of my mother. Her deep blue eyes regarded me coldly, and her pitch-black hair was the only sign of darkness within the void of light. "Mother?" I asked, dumbfounded. "What's the meaning of this?" "Yushu dash." My voice halted as I ran out of air, and I found myself unable to take another breath. It was still a novel enough experience that I panicked for a moment, but I quickly realized what was going on. A higher one stood before me, disguised as my mother. "You see me as your mother?" it asked mockingly. "I wonder at why those on the mortal plane perceive me as a nurturing female." I remained silent, keenly aware of how capricious and powerful the being standing before me was. "You must be wondering why you're here." "Yes, you said that you would be silent to me from now on and leave me to do as I please." "No, I didn't," the being laughed. "You and I haven't met. Your former patron has a fondness for royal plurals, though, so I can see the source of your confusion. Despite its word choice, it does not speak for all of us." The laughter contorted my mother's face, and for a moment I was able to glimpse through the facade. The higher one's eyes became a deep purple, and its teeth became rows of fangs. My mother's pitch-black hair slowly shifted into a gleaming blue. It strained my eyes to witness the transformation. I blinked and was suddenly facing a nude woman that was much taller than me. Her skin was a pale pink color, and her nippleless breasts were larger than my head. I wondered at the symbolism for a moment, but quickly banished those thoughts. "Why am I here?" I asked, hoping that it didn't notice my fear. "Everyone and everything has a role to play in the grand production that you call life," the higher one said, its voice no longer resembling my mother's. "Tell me, sinner, what role do you think best suits you?" I don't know." "Yes, you do. You just don't wish to say it aloud and risk offending me." The higher one's laughter mocked me, but the memory of my last encounter with such a being served to keep my anger in check. You see yourself far above your station, as a king or even an emperor. You frequently imagine the luxuries such a position would bring, and only occasionally wonder at the burdens that latch themselves to it. You are smart enough to know this is an empty pursuit, but your circumstances prevent you from seeing any other route to take. So you plod along, hoping one day to wear a crown. Am I wrong? Once again mocked, but my anger remained sheathed. No, I admitted. Tell me, if the demons keep their word and allow you to be the king of the Night Kingdom, what then? If they are successful in their ambitions, you will be unable to expand your borders to the lengths that you desire. And outside of those borders, the demons will rule. You will constantly fear their encroachment, and it isn't as if they will rule the lands that they hold in a way that will benefit your people. There will be no immigration. There will be no cultural exchanges. There will be no trade. The Night Kingdom will stagnate, eventually withering, dying, and becoming one with the demonic horde. The casualness with which the higher one laid bare one of my deeply held insecurities about my partnership with the demons further offended me. It had condescendingly explained exactly what had been dwelling just beneath the surface of my thoughts, as if I was too stupid to have thought of it. I couldn't help but snap a little. And what am I to do about it? I asked bitterly. What choice do I have now? That's exactly why I am here, she said with another laugh. You see, vampire, you have an almost infinite number of choices ahead of you. Regardless of how many there are, these choices will ultimately lead you down one of two metaphorical paths: ruin or redemption. Paths, ruin or redemption? Yes. The road to ruin is obvious. You remain loyal to the demons for a bit too long, even as a ruse, and you will suffer for it. The higher one added extra weight to the word suffer, which heavily implied that it would be an extreme form thereof. I felt a quake of fear run through me as I recalled what happened to me at the hands of the kobolds in the dungeon. She seemed to notice this and smirked. And the road to redemption? Naturally, that's a bit more complicated. The point of redemption is not to pay for your sins, but to learn from them and grow in such a way that they aren't repeated. Knowing this, do you believe that you can be redeemed? I don't even know what sins I have committed. Not consciously, no. But I know that you've been looking into the fair folk, their laws, customs, and relationship with my kind. You know that your current form means that you didn't commit a sin that's easily forgivable. That's why, even without knowledge of your transgressions, you rail against your demise with such ferocity. You're afraid of what might come next. Isn't everyone? I asked sarcastically. No, actually. The fair folk don't fear death. They do not concern themselves with suffering either, for such things are temporary to them. When their flesh is rent asunder, they are born anew, ready to experience all of the pleasures of life once more. The higher one stared at me silently for a moment. The greatest joys that you can experience as a vampire are a mere trifle compared to even basic contentment as a wilder. The most minor inconvenience to one such as you is equivalent to the most intense torment that a wilder can experience. Ah, so I should want to be a fairy then. What you desire is entirely up to you, but you can't fool me into believing that you don't despise your own existence. Even the smell of the most beautiful flowers holds the scent of corpses for one such as you. Every minor torment that I suffered on a daily basis came to mind. Flowers do carry the scent of corpses. Food tastes of old blood and bile. The sun burns my skin, and the only reason I can withstand it is because I immediately heal the damage that's done. I stared in silence, feeling the truth of this being's words cut into me. What must I do, then, to be redeemed? I asked, trying not to sound pathetic. Demonstrate that you have learned from your mistakes. Release the wilder-turned thralls from their torments and the vampires from your control. Let them make their own choices and follow their own paths. Betray the demons and attempt to thwart their plans. If you do this, you will eventually encounter the being that defeated you in the depths of that dungeon. Aid him, do all of this, and you will be redeemed. That doesn't sound so complicated. Oh, but it is. The road to redemption ends in your death, whilst the road to ruin might see you live for quite a while, if you can call it living. A ripple suddenly traveled through the void, and I looked around in alarm. It would seem that it's time to wake up and make your decision. The higher one laughed. I only hope that it's an amusing one. Chapter 108. Nick Smith. Adventurer Level 11. Human American. We walked for a while longer without incident. It felt like more than half an hour. The tree canopy didn't let much light through, so it was difficult to tell how long our journey was. Not that I was all that great at telling time with the sun. Once my feet started to get sore, we came across a portion of the path which made a sharp turn. Upon making the turn, we were faced with a fence that stretched far wider than it should have. I paused, took 2 steps back, and examined the way we came. The path, which had been lit well enough for us to see, was now shrouded in darkness. The direction that it came from, though, would definitely have taken us directly into the fence. My double take caught Larry's attention, and he laughed. A spatial distortion, the Lich said, still chuckling, one of many tricks employed by the fair folk to protect themselves, and the main reason it was so important for us to follow the path. I see, was my reply. We continued toward the fence, and as we got closer to it, I noticed that it was far more intricately detailed than I had initially realized. The bronze coloration of the metal paired well with the semi-chaotic designs that had been incorporated. Acorns, leaves, pine cones, and a variety of flowers were sporadically placed throughout the giant metal mural that was acting as a fence. Between these representations of plant life were complicated symbols that made my head hurt when I looked at them for too long. There were no guards at the gate, and when we approached it opened for us. Nash and I paused for a moment, but Yulk and Larry crossed the threshold of the gate without any hesitation. My brother and I shared a glance, then quickly followed. As we stepped through the gate, the scenery underwent a drastic change. Instead of hostile feral plants everywhere, we were standing in a very well-tended garden. The grass wasn't trimmed, but it was still uniform in length. Trees gently rose above the grass, and beautifully manicured bushes stretching their branches into the sky. There was an odd, non-symmetrical order to everything. Needless to say, it was much more relaxing than the area we had come from. Ahead of us was a circular clearing paved with white stones, and beyond that was another gate. When I tried to look at what the gate was attached to, my eyes watered and my head hurt. A tall Fae waited patiently in front of the second gate and nodded as we approached. Yulk and Nash Alta, Nick Smith and Larry Vizamiro, it said. You are expected. Sit. I wanted to ask how long we would have to wait. But the giant Fae that stood before us had told us to sit. It was not a suggestion, nor a request. It was a command, and my bones itched to obey. Without a word, the 4 of us sat on one of the benches. It was then that I noticed the other people waiting to be seen. There were wilder, orcs, elves, dwarves, gnomes, and even some from races as yet unidentified. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting against the confusion that was assaulting my mind. How had I not seen these people? I don't like this place, Nash grumbled. It's trying to play tricks on us. Yes, I'd noticed that as well. Are all of these spatial distortions? Yulk turned to Larry. I'm not entirely certain what it is you're referring to, Larry admitted. The only oddity I've seen thus far was the fence appearing in an impossible location. That's 'cause he's dead, a familiar voice next to me pointed out. The living are way easier to fool with shrouds and perception alterations. It takes a lot more effort to get the non-living to stop seeing the world in a mundane way. I let go of my nose to look at the source of the voice. It was a very rotund fairy. It took a second to recognize them through the cloud that had begun enveloping my brain. Kint? I asked. What are you doing here? Same as you, the fairy grinned. Waiting. Are you feeling all right? I'm pretty sure you weren't this pale yesterday. I don't know. Larry, Nash, and Yulk turned their attention to me, and I suddenly felt like I was being studied. Nash put his hand on my shoulder and stared into my eyes, which caused me to try to look at the ground for some reason. He grabbed my chin and tried to make me look at him. Nick, what's going on? My brother asked. I feel weird, I said, like I'm having trouble staying awake, but I'm not tired at all. That is the least of your worries, Ten said. I'm barely keeping you conscious. Did you look at the fence a little too closely? Kint asked. It was very pretty. Ah, yup, that would be a shroud. You know, most people would look away once it started to hurt. Any of you got any sugar? I was dimly aware of my companions giving negative replies. Kint repeated the question to someone else, but I couldn't quite tell who. The seat beneath me began to feel as if it were rocking, but Nash held me steady. I got some. A red person walked over to us. What's it for? This guy looked at the fence a little too long. Got shrouded, Kint replied. Spare some sugar for a favor. Ah, no, I ain't got any use for fairy favors, the red guy laughed. I can just give it to him direct. Should I sprinkle some in his mouth? What the fuck is that thing? The red guy took a step back and studied me for a moment. I wanted to tell him that I was a human. I wanted to ask what he was. Unfortunately, my mouth wouldn't do what I wanted it to because it was too busy feeling my tongue. Kint explained that I was a human and that the sugar needed to be put in my mouth. The red guy reached into his vest and pulled out a small bag. I was vaguely aware that I was supposed to open my mouth, but when I tried, I realized it was already open. When did that happen? I blinked a few times, trying to recall what was going on as a sweet taste hit my tongue. My mouth closed on its own, and I heard my lips smack together a couple of times. Then my mind was free from the cloud. I looked at Nash, still holding me by the back of the head. You can let go now, I think, I said. I feel better. Oh damn, that was fast, Kint laughed as Nash released me. Usually takes a few minutes, or a nap. I could go for a nap. What happened to me? I gently massaged my head and noted that my temples were pulsing a little. I had no doubt that without 10, I'd have a splitting headache. Everyone watched me with varying levels of concern. Well, the fence of warding is designed with several security features, the fairy explained. First, it's difficult to get through because it's unnaturally strong. It takes a lot to bend the metal and even more to break it. Second, there are several glyphs that have a variety of effects all over it. Some of these glyphs absorb magic, some add even more strength to the fence, and some cast a shroud over the mind of those who try to study the fence for weaknesses. I wasn't studying it for weaknesses, I was just admiring it. I guess it doesn't know the difference. The guards in Climeta should have warned you. They were probably pretty distracted, so shrouds cause confusion. Shrouds can do a lot of things, and in this case it's actually supposed to put you in a coma for a few days. Plenty of time for the bailiffs to determine your intentions. If they decide you weren't being malicious, they give you some sugar and wake you up. If not, then you get some jail time. The court has a jail. Nope, they'd take you right back to Climeta, at least in theory. I've only ever heard of the shroud being triggered by accident. That's because the Wilder are pretty hush-hush about it. Studying the fence is considered espionage, the red guy said. I work as a court recorder, and a few years back a guy got caught by the shroud. He had a notebook which revealed that he had been trying to map the glyphs on the fence, got convicted of espionage and sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. Got off easy because he was so cooperative. Cooperative? I asked. Yeah, he was very forthcoming with who sent him and why. Turns out it was some mages from one of the southern kingdoms who wanted to know more about glyph magic, but knew it was illegal to pry. So they paid the guy to pry for them. The judge also issued an arrest warrant for them, but the southern kingdoms don't really do extradition. I see. Oh, and thanks for the help. No problem, my name's Ujin. He offered a hand and I shook it, introducing myself. Then I answered a few questions about being a human. The other people sitting around us were pretty interested too, but kept silent as we talked. So what brings you to see the court? I asked. Just dropping off some records, Ujin shrugged. Trails that the fair folk have a vested interest in, changes to city legislation. Then I grab the responses and bring them back. Exciting stuff. Responses? Yep, the courts have a right to object to rulings made in trials that they are involved in, no matter how little their involvement is. It isn't a right that I've ever seen or heard of them using, but we still deliver the records just in case. We also keep them apprised of the legislative activities in case they wish to visit the city. Fat chance of that. I take it that as a court reporter, you're a permanent resident of Climeta, Yulk interjected. That's odd for an impy. It's not that odd, Ujin shrugged. I just like the city more than I liked traveling aimlessly. Plus, well, you probably know how imps are. It's best to distance yourself unless you want to be affiliated, you know. Really? I asked, appalled. That's for Nash Alta, Yulk Alta, Nick Smith, Lari Visimiro, you are to appear before the court. The lanky Fay interrupted. Stand and approach the gate. I felt the compulsion to rise, but it was much less intense than the compulsion to sit had been. I attributed this to the shroud. We rose, and I stared at Ujin for a moment. It bothered me that he had given up on his community, his people, instead of fighting to change the things he hated about it. I couldn't really place why I felt so strongly about his defeatism, though, and it wasn't really my place to try to change his mind. Instead, I gave him a nod. Thank you for your help. May we meet again under better circumstances, I said. Sure, that'd be nice. See ya, human. Yulk, Nash, Larry and I approached the guard, who stepped aside for us. Once it was out of the way, the gate opened without a sound. I took a deep breath and led the way through. It was finally time to see the court. Chapter 109. Nash Alta Adventurer Level 11, Orc, Nulavan. I kept a wary eye on Nick as we rose, ready to catch him if he hadn't completely recovered from the shroud. It was very likely that 10 was the only reason that Nick hadn't fallen into a coma. His legs were solid, though, so I relaxed a little. Thank you for your help. May we meet again under better circumstances, Nick said. Sure, that'd be nice, the imp replied. See ya, human. Yulk and I shared a knowing look. The odds of us running into Ujin again were pretty low, but if we did, Nick would probably get a much-needed education. An imp is an imp, after all. Even if he had forsworn his traveling band, escaping one's upbringing is a monumental task. He had been helpful, though, so maybe I was wrong about him. The tall Fey guard stepped aside and the gate silently parted as we approached. We continued along the path, and I let Nick walk ahead of me so that I could keep an eye on him. I had relaxed, but only a little. Before long, there were tall hedges on either side of the path. They were so tall that I couldn't see the sun. As the walkway began to curve to the right, I noticed that there weren't any shadows either. More magical fuckery, I muttered. Yep, sighed Nick. The curve turned into a spiral that continued far longer than should have been possible. Just as I was beginning to lose patience, the hedges opened up into a massive field of flowers. The path halted, and so did we. Approach, mortals, a booming yet gentle voice rang out. Lari seemed unfazed, but my brothers and I shared a concerned glance. Despite our hesitation, we did as we were told and stepped into the field of flowers. As we crossed the threshold, my skin and eyes tingled like a limb that had been sat on for too long. I blinked, trying to drive away the sensation, and found myself suddenly surrounded by wilder of all shapes and sizes. Fairies, fae, sylvans, gulpers, sprites, and more watched us silently, as if judging us. In front of us, the ground formed a large dais. Atop it stood 8 chairs, fashioned from stone and root. 4 of these chairs were empty and plain, but the 4 chairs in the center had gem-like flowers blooming on top of their backrests. Upon the center chairs sat the most beautiful beings I had ever laid eyes on. Except for Nima, of course. Each of the center chairs had different colored flowers. The leftmost chair was red, then green, blue, and yellow. The occupants were wilder, that might have been archfey. Were it not for the sheer power radiating from them, I could see why discussing them made the other archfey nervous. Under the red flowers was a male who looked as if he'd spent thousands of years wrestling monsters with his bare hands. His stern features looked as if they had been carved from stone. I caught myself avoiding eye contact, intimidated by his openly hostile glare. The wilder under the green and yellow flowers were more androgynous. If they hadn't been nude, I wouldn't have been able to tell that they were male and female, respectively. Their features were warm and inviting, but there was a harsh smirk on their lips that reeked of passive aggression. Beneath the yellow flowers was an extremely buxom female. Her puffy frown indicated a deep boredom. As the wilder under the red flowers was a caricature of masculinity, she seemed to be equally a caricature of femininity. Almost like tits, actually. Yulk Alta, Nash Alta. By extension, Nick Smith, Green Flowers, sneered. You have been granted an audience to request our favor. Indeed they have, due to Mamuldabrand's machinations. But why are you here, Lari Visimiro? Red Flowers growled. It has been 10 years, Queen Incandis, Lari replied, bowing his head. I was to check in with you to see if you have found a method of returning my mortal form. Since I was fortunate enough to become friends with these three mortals, I decided to accompany them when I realized that they were scheduled to meet with the Honorable Summer Court, saving us both some time. I see. More dull work, sighed Yellow Flowers. Did we find a way to change him back? No, said Green Flowers, the debt remains. It has been a century since it was first incurred. That means interest is owed, Incandis grumbled. It is an old matter, and it isn't as if we are pressed for time. Yellow Flowers rolled her eyes. It's boring. Let us hear the new matter from the fleshy ones. I have hopes for excitement. We can tend to the lich after. Yulk Alta, Nash Alta. You behold the High Queens Incandis, Floris, Aqueous, and Luminous. You are permitted to make a request of this court. Blue Flowers, probably Aqueous, said in an authoritative tone, Speak. Yulk glanced at me, and I nodded slightly to let him know that I was completely out of my depth, and would appreciate it if he would do the talking. He returned my nod and gestured for me to join him. As I stepped forward, he cracked his back and knelt. I quickly knelt beside him. Majestic queens of the summer court, we humbly request that you bestow upon us a kindness with your esteemed and supreme prowess, Yulk said dramatically. We have taken it upon ourselves to see this human, Nick Smith, returned safely to his home and family. The queens shared a glance and a nod of approval, seemingly impressed with Yulk's theatrics. So the favor you seek is our aid in your mission, Incandis asked. But the human is not kneeling, Luminous raised her eyebrow. Is that not impertinence? Not really, Aqueous said. The human is not the one asking for our help, the orcs are, and they are sufficiently prostrated. Well, I would still prefer it if the human would knee. A sudden strong static slammed into me like a hammer striking an anvil. Every hair on my body tried to stand on end. I looked up in alarm, only to find all four of the queens staring intently at Nick. Well, that's interesting, Luminous said coldly. Yes, what do you mortals call it? Floris asked. Attouched, yes? What business do the higher ones have with you, human? Incandis demanded. Nick froze, unsure of how to proceed. Something big had just happened, but we had no way of knowing what it was. Yulk quickly returned his gaze to the ground. If I may, your majesties, he said. By all means, Incandis sat back in his seat. Nick Smith, our adopted brother, has inadvertently curried the favor of the higher ones. He has even met with them during moments of insensibility. From what we have gathered, they appear to be watching him as a form of entertainment. However, we do not know why he has garnered such rapt attention. The answer is easily inferred, Luminous yawned. Humans are rare, they're interesting by default, which is boring. All of this is quite irrelevant, Aqueous said. Let us return to the matter at hand. What aid do you seek in accomplishing your goal? Our goal is to safely return Nick to his home and family, Yulk replied. We humbly request information regarding how to accomplish this monumental task. Information? Incandis laughed. Why not ask us to perform the task for you? Could it be that you doubt our ability to perform such magics? Yulk wisely remained silent. If it does doubt our ability, it is correct, Aqueous said, annoyed. We could easily return the human to his home and family, but safely is an entirely different issue. The rest of the queens nodded, though Incandis did so begrudgingly, seemingly upset that his goading was unsuccessful. Floris held out a hand and slowly pointed at Nick. We can tell you precisely how to get home, he said. The rituals, chants, and sacrifices necessary to do so are all well within the grasp of mortals. However, traveling through time and space in such a manner is extremely detrimental to flesh and bone. You would arrive as nothing more than mush, human. That wouldn't satisfy the conditions for the requested favor. Luminous sighed, then sat up a little. Oh, I've had an exciting idea. We could tell them a bit more about such travel and see if they could figure it out. Such knowledge would be worth little more than a sweet treat, Incandis said. Call me vain, but I'd like to think trading in such a manner is a bit beneath us. I would agree, but it isn't as if we know of a way to accomplish their mission. Is our mission truly so impossible, your majesties? Yulk asked. The sadness in his tone shocked me until I realized just how hopeless everything seemed. The four beings before us were our best bet to find a way to get home, and they had just admitted that they didn't know a good way to do so. I glanced at Nick, who had a clenched jaw and hands that were balled into fists, like a young boy trying desperately not to cry. Yulk's sorrow gave the queens pause, and for a moment they dropped their facade and looked at him with pity. Seeing them drop their masks of superiority made them appear all the more beautiful. A moment later, three of them turned to look at Aqueous. "Not impossible, no," Aqueous gently said. "Almost, though." "So there is a way," Incandice muttered. "Yes, there is a way. Perhaps multiple, but this knowledge is not easy to obtain, though it sits at the back of every mortal mind. Whilst one would only need to seek answers to a few specific questions, knowing which questions to ask and where to find the answers is invaluable. And yet we are speaking of skipping that entirely. I wonder, do we require any suitable favors that can be exchanged?" "Pardon the interruption, but is Mummeldebrand's favor not enough?" Larry asked. "Of course it isn't," Incandice said angrily. "What we owed Mummeldobran was enough to gain an audience. If the heathen presented our debt as anything more than that, you have been swindled. Though knowing his adoration of inebriation, it would not surprise me if the deception unintentional." Yes, Incandice. Mummeldobran is a bad seed," Floris interjected impatiently. "That aside, I can think of no favors suitable for this exchange. Everything of sufficient difficulty has been seen to by the big orc." The four of us didn't have enough time to express our confusion before a commotion began behind us. Speaking of which. The cries of indignation and anger drew our attention away from the queens. An absolutely massive orc, larger even than High Chief Ulamak, walked up next to us. He briefly glanced our way, then gave the queens a sarcastic bow. But that short glance was more than enough for me to recognize his face. It was face I hadn't seen since I was a child. It had been so long that for a moment I believed that I had imagined the resemblance. Then logic took over, and I realized that there was only one orc bigger than High Chief Ulamak, the estranged absentee father of my soon-to-be bride. "A Gurno," Aqueous sighed. "I take it that Vailun has returned to the cycle." "It has," the bastard nodded. "Yelin is recovering quickly as well. Not that you'd care." "Of course we wouldn't care about a village full of mortals," Incandice shouted. "Asking us to care about those that will eventually be dirt and stone is like asking you to care about respect and decorum. How dare you?" Incandice was interrupted by a movement so rapid that I couldn't tell what it was until after it had already happened. The motion in question was a Gurno drawing his blade and lunging forward in an attempt to decapitate the queen. A Gurno stood before Incandice, sword lodged firmly into the queen's forearm. A trickle of blood dripped down the blade. "Oh, stop flirting, you two," Luminous rolled her eyes. "A Gurno, are you truly so crass that you cannot even wait your turn? Must you interrupt their audience simply because you can't wait a few minutes?" Luminous gestured at us, but a Gurno didn't take his eyes off of Incandice. Without even thinking about it, I stood and began to walk toward him. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to feel what Nima felt when he abandoned her. I didn't know how to do that, though. Such intricate revenge was far beyond my planning abilities. Instead, I walked up to him and socked him in the kidney as hard as I possibly could. It felt like punching a rock, but he winced. I dropped into a crouch, narrowly avoided the elbow and sword that whooshed over my head, then tried to connect an uppercut. He avoided the uppercut by leaping back to get some distance between us. We locked eyes and his jaw dropped. "Nash," he asked, "is that you?" "Fuck you," I shouted. "Why aren't you dead?" "What?" "The only possible excuse for abandoning Nima was for you to die, painfully, like the fucking coward you are." "Ah, that's what this is about. I had to watch her grieve you. Years, you sack of shit, years. What kind of father leaves his daughter to grow up without him? A shitty one, no doubt." His nonchalant acceptance of my assessment pissed me off even further. I leapt at him and struck him in the gut. He stood there, letting me hit him over and over again. By the time my white-hot rage subsided, my fists were bleeding. "All right, that's enough," he said. "Calm down, kid." And just like that, my rage returned. I swung upwards towards his jaw and found myself on my back. I stared up at the sky for a moment before I realized that I couldn't breathe, and I recalled a foot catching me just beneath my ribs. I wheezed and tried to sit up, but collapsed back to the ground. Is this what Nick felt like sparring with Thunra? Chapter 110. Agurno, Adventurer Level 152. Orc, Kirkenian. I stared at the boy-turned-man from a past that I thought I'd left behind. He was trying desperately to recover from my kick to his gut, which had been a little higher than intended. His gasps for air reminded me of how close he'd come to being split in two. If it hadn't been for a very timely warning from Grammar, his crouch wouldn't have been nearly fast enough. "You should have let him hit you some more," Grammar said. "You deserve it." Ignoring my biggest critic, I looked at the people that Nash had been with and recognized Yulk as well. Of the two of them, Yulk had undergone the most drastic change. His dark, messy hair had vanished, his spine had an unnatural curve to it, but his face and eyes remained just as they had all those years ago. Yulk and his brother had become fast friends with my daughter, so much so that people would always joke that Nash and Nima would make a good couple. Yulk stood and took a step forward. It would appear that more justified suffering is on the way. "Look, I get it," I sighed. "We're in an emotionally charged situation. But come on, Yulk. You were always the level-headed one." "I still am," Yulk smiled and gestured at me with both hands. "Tlob srolmeet sak." Even with all of my relentless fighting and training, I barely managed to trigger my various resistance skills before the lightning hit me. Despite those resistances, the spell brought me down to one knee. Once my muscles stopped their brutal spasms, I glared angrily at the younger altar brother. Surprisingly, he had fallen to both knees, with intense pain apparent on his face. Then the smell of burnt hair hit my nostrils. I examined my torso and found a bald patch, where the spell had hit me. It finally occurred to me that even with my resistances, the spell had hurt. A lightning spell that could pierce my resistances and had a kickback on the caster. "Did you just use Imlaw's fucking bolt on me?" I demanded angrily. Before Yulk could answer, the Lich and the other thing stepped between us. At first glance, I had believed it to be an elf, but closer examination revealed that the only real similarity this thing had with elves was skin color. Its ears were rounded, its hair was oily, its eyes were too close together, its nose wasn't pointed enough, and its chin was too round. I stared down the pair of monsters. The elf-like creature put an ever so slightly trembling hand on its sword, but it didn't draw its blade. The stance it chose wasn't a bad one, allowing its draw to become a slash, but its sword wasn't curved enough for that technique to be completely effective. This was someone still learning swordsmanship who nearly mastered the basics. I felt a wave of relief wash over me and realized that the Lich had cast a healing spell. My mind had preemptively connected the dots and realized that the Lich was Lari Visimiro, son of Imlaw the Grand. We hadn't met before, but I'd heard a lot about him, his curse and his healing talents. He was also wary of me, but I gathered that from his body language. His expressionless skeletal face didn't show it. "Fucking cunt," Nash shouted. I sighed as his arm wrapped around my neck. Then I stood, taking him off the ground. His arm squeezed and squeezed, presumably with all his might, but the muscles in my neck wouldn't allow my airflow or circulation to be cut off. I flicked at a nerve in his elbow, which caused him to lose his grip and crash to the ground. "Look, boys." "I get it," I said. "You're mad at me because you care about Nima, but think this through. Do you think?" Nash interrupted me by kicking me in the calf. Without even looking, I kicked him in the ass and sent him flying a foot or two. "Do you think I'm really going to sit around and let you beat on me?" I asked. "Eventually I'm going to get tired of your shit, and then one of us is going to have to kill the other. Now, as far as I know, Nima might have grown up to be heartless enough not to care about that. But knowing her mum, I doubt it." "You don't get to talk about her," Nash shouted between wheezes. Lari walked over to him and began healing him again. "The fuck I don't," I growled. "I may have left her and her mother, but I'll be damned if I didn't stick around a whole hells of a lot longer than my dad did for me." What? "Yeah, being big, smart, and abandoning children is kind of a family tradition, kid. Ulamak got to be raised in the capital because Dad knew he was going to take over as High Chief." I got raised by my mum out in the boonies because he figured I wasn't suited to a fucking desk job. Fact is that I was in my kids' lives a lot longer than he was in mine, and you aren't gonna lay there and tell me that isn't a win. That is the weakest, most self-pitying non-apology I've ever heard, Grammer said. Are you all quite done? Incandice asked angrily. No, I'm not, I shot back. What the fuck is that thing? I gestured my head at the creature accompanying the altar boys. Its eyebrows shot up as if it were surprised by my sudden attention. Uh, I, I'm a human, it said. I remembered stories from various taverns about a creature found in a dungeon called a human, and about how my brother seemed to have a fondness for it. I glanced at Yulk, who began to explain in further detail. Nash had been the one that found it, and they were trying to return it from wherever it had come from. The altar boys always did have big hearts. Yes, yes, and now they appear before us to request information on how to travel the vast distances through time and space safely to get him home, Floris sighed. A request that you are currently interrupting, Agurno. We congratulate you on a job well done, but we can discuss payment once we are finished here. Or we can discuss payment now, I said, thinking for a moment. I'm fairly certain that you are out of relics that would be of use to me. Gold doesn't have much use either, since I already have more of it than I or any of my descendants could possibly spend without founding a nation. My guess is that you are going to reward me with a favor. You're probably going to ask a favor of them as well. What business is it of yours? Incandice demanded. I've always been curious about time travel, I grinned. Teleportation would be handy knowledge as well. So how about I cash in my favor and you tell me how the human here is going to get back home? They can stay, of course, my treat. The entire court went nervously silent and still, which wasn't exactly an uncommon occurrence during my visits. Nash and Yulk watched me suspiciously, probably trying to figure out if I was messing with them or not. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't. There were hundreds of beings that considered me a hero, completely beyond reproach. I could murder someone in cold blood, and they would all assume I had acted in their best interests. The sudden reminder that I wasn't much better than my father had stung in a deep way. But this knowledge, this thing they would have to pay dearly for, was as easy for me to obtain as breathing. I smirked at the boys while the queens conferred. Nash seemed dumbfounded, but Yulk glared at me as if he knew exactly why I was helping them. He always was the smart one. Against our better judgment, we have decided to accept this. For lack of a better word, bargain, Aqueous announced. We will tell you what they wanted to know with them present, without requesting any further payment. I nodded, sheathing grammar. The wound on Incandice's arm sizzled as it tried to close. Even the queens were vulnerable to iron, though much less so than other Wilder. I'd always wondered what it would be like to fight all four of them at once. Not a fight that I'd walk away from unscathed, but it would certainly be a thrill. No matter how many insults I heaped upon them, though, they refused to take the bait. Manipulation of space is simple, Luminous began with a yawn. Trivial, in fact. Take a thing and put it over there. Fleshy ones do this with their own bodies, without even thinking about it. Those without flesh have to work harder at it, and therefore have much more knowledge about the intricacies of the process. Getting the human home by mundane means would be entirely possible. Time is another matter entirely, Floris interjected. Events occur as a result of cause and effect. To travel through time, one would have to undo said cause and effect. One can easily alter the flow of cause and effect, but changing it after the fact would be an impossible feat for any that are under its influence. Like trying to dig through a mountain whilst buried beneath it, Incandice added. What do you mean I can get home by mundane means? The human asked. We did not permit you to as Dash. I would like that question to be answered, I interrupted. Incandice glared at me while the other queens shared nervous looks with one another. The answer to that question should be obvious, especially to the human, Aqueous said, unless the higher ones are intentionally keeping it hidden. What do they have to do with anything? I asked. The human is attouched, Incandice replied. I took a moment to study the poor thing. There was still a certain naivety in his eyes that came with youth and inexperience. A boy, then, calling the higher ones evil would be wrong. Callous and uncaring are much better descriptors. When my father was High Chief, A cult led by a touched elf sprang up in one of the kingdoms to the south. This cult usurped a portion of that kingdom and began a theocratic regime that worshipped the higher ones. Under that elf's influence, the new nation invaded the United Chiefdoms in an attempt to expand their borders. My father responded in kind, and that territory is now known as Hyrnis. The newly installed Great Chief discovered that it contained a mine, which allowed my father to viciously defend our borders from then on. The kingdom from which the cult formed protested this, but they were quickly destroyed and assimilated by their neighbors. The touched elf and his followers believed that they were beloved by the higher ones. Perhaps they were, in a way, but they were still used as pawns to force resources to change hands. Such is the nature of the higher ones. Even fighting them plays right into their hands. So what? He should ask them instead, I demanded. Do you fear the higher ones? Incandus looked like he was about to explode, but Aqueous held up a hand. Yes, we do. At the moment, she said. That in and of itself is unusual and indicates that their influence is at play. You know as well as we do that if we were to try to answer that question and they didn't want us to, something would interfere. So there isn't much point. Fine. How does the human get back to his family then? The higher ones might be able to do it, Incandus shrugged. They're certainly more qualified than we are. But they sent him to us instead. They wouldn't be able to accomplish this without manifesting themselves, which would create several issues, Aqueous said. However, if the human were to go to them. How's he supposed to do that? I asked with a laugh. Die? Or can one simply walk into the ethereal plane? Dying obviously wouldn't help. Thankfully, yes, one can simply walk into the ethereal plane, just not from here. From where? The fair realm. The Hell's Haven. Just as this plane has cracks that lead to those planes have cracks that lead to the ethereal plane and beyond. There may even be cracks to the ethereal plane here, but we've never encountered them. You see that, boys? I chuckled and turned to the Altar brothers. You beg them for help, and they tell you to go to the Hells. Yet, that does sound like the probable solution to this issue, Yulk sighed. The question becomes how to enter these different planes. You simply must find a crack, widen it, and walk through, Floris said. I would strongly suggest finding a crack to Haven. Both the fair realm and the Hells are quite inhospitable to flesh. Would there be a favor that we could provide for guidance on how to find such a crack? No, that giant lump of muscle there has done everything serious enough to warrant that information. Incandus shot me a glare. You seem to have a good head on your shoulders, Yulk Altar. Use it, and you'll find the way on your own. I am unworthy of your praise. If that were true, we wouldn't have given it. The favor has been fulfilled, and our business has concluded. Leave. I was half tempted to make the queens force me out, mostly to test if I could best the previous technique they had used. But I could tell that Nash still had something to say. I had things to say as well, so I followed them out. The moment the gate closed behind us, he turned to face me. Don't think that helping us will make me forgive you, he growled. Boy, I don't give a fuck about your forgiveness, I replied with a chuckle. Hells, the only one who has any right to offer me forgiveness is Nima. What of her mother? Yulk asked with venom in his tone. Oh, please. If there was anyone in that glorified outpost who knew me, it was Urella. She was prepared, or else she wouldn't have sent back all the money I've sent them. Bet you've never heard her say anything bad about me, neither. Have you? The altar boys paused and glanced at each other, as if suddenly realizing something. That's because she's wise enough to know that getting mad at the wind for blowing is pointless. She's got no forgiveness to offer me because I did what was expected. I wasn't meant to be a father or a husband, and we both knew it. I think she might have just wanted to see how long I'd last. Why didn't you ever come back for Nima? Nash demanded. Shit, that's the most complicated thing anybody's ever asked me, I laughed. I don't know. Not really. I could go on about how being forced into a life of domestication was torture for someone like me. Or I could point out that I could never love my kids the way that they needed to be loved, and by removing myself from the picture, their mums could find someone who could. Maybe I just couldn't handle the responsibility of having people waiting for me to come back while actively risking my life. But those are just platitudes, pretty words to polish a turd. My reasons don't matter. I didn't go back because I didn't want to, and I'm a shitty, selfish person. You can still go back, even just for a little bit. Careful, you're overstepping. Alern has reached out to me a few times over the years to give me updates and such, and I've even replied. So Nima must know how to reach me, but she hasn't even tried. You know her better than I do, Nash. How would she feel if I were to suddenly re-enter her life? Would it make her happy to know that the reason her dad left was because he didn't want to be a dad anymore? Would she appreciate you being the one to drag me back? The truth in my words struck him silent. Yeah, that's what I thought. Alern knows how to get in touch with me. If Nima ever wants to, she can. We're going to get married next year, he said softly. Congrats. I'm sure you'll make each other happy. I chuckled and turned away. For what it's worth, you were a good kid. I'm glad it's you. I stepped past them and smirked at all of the eyes pointed at the ground. The court crowd would normally eat up this kind of drama like it was their first meal of the week, but they knew of me. Each and every member of the crowd was pretending they were blind and deaf. Oh, and if you want, you can tell her that I didn't leave because I hated her, I said, not looking back. I left because I hated myself. I waved over my shoulder as I did what I do best.